If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, truckers, long-distance drivers, and people who drive over forests and isolated roads at night, what's your most terrifying or unexplained sighting with time slips, otherworldly creatures, orbs, abductions, etc., out there? The place where I was driving is close to a Shoshone Paiute reservation, and their reservation has been uprooted and moved at least 3 times that I know of. There are many strange occurrences in the area and a few ghost legends. As I was driving a friend to their house one night, we were passing close to one of the places that they were moved from, and in front of my car, I saw this white figure that was completely hairless running on all 4s across the road. It looked humanoid but extremely malnourished. I slammed on my brakes, but it had already crossed. I keep trying to think of what it might have been, but I come to dead ends. I thought it might have been a mangy coyote, but that wouldn't explain its long humanoid legs or its head looking like that of a human. Any suggestions? This story is my husband's, and it actually made him believe in the paranormal. He used to work on quite a large military site that was separated into several large annexes, all of which were quite a distance from each other. It is a rural area, and most of the sites are connected by narrow roads that circle the enclosed site. He starts work at 6 a.m., and it's a very dark morning. He passes through the security gates and cycles down the main path to Site B, which is a good 10-minute journey, and there is nothing or nobody around as he is the first worker on shift. He is about 5 minutes away, and his chain on his bike snaps. As he gets up to fix it, he can see someone or something standing by the wooded area. He described it as a very tall shadow of a man with a large black hat. My husband was freaking out, as nobody should be there. He is trying so hard to fix the chain and knows he has a good 5 minutes before he gets to his annex. He eventually fixes it and cycles it off. He refused to look back until he was a good 100 meters away, and whatever it was had gone. He doesn't know what he saw that day, but he said it definitely wasn't human. Back in college, I was driving from Milwaukee to Green Bay on I-43 in Wisconsin, about 9 p.m. on an autumn night. Out in the country, I saw a green ball fly through the air, about 100 meters away, parallel to the highway. This green, glowing ball flew towards the ground at an imperceptible speed, but at least 3 times as fast as I was going, 70 miles per hour. It kept getting brighter and closer to the ground until the ball hit the ground in front of me. At this point, I had slowed down and pulled over as close to the landing point as I could, and I found a green mist at the side of the road. I wasn't too keen on getting out of my car and wandering around in an unfamiliar forest on a cold night, especially as I didn't know what I had just witnessed. When I explained this to my astronomy professor, she said it was likely a ball of ionized gas flying through the atmosphere and landing. To this day, it's one of the most interesting and creepiest things I have ever witnessed. We saw ourselves drive past, and I still can't explain how. We passed the exact same car going up a rural mountain road in the middle of the night. It was a very distinct vehicle, so the chances of us being mistaken were much lower, even in the dark. It was a 1985 Dodge Omni with aftermarket spokes on the hubcaps, and one of the doors was a different color than the rest of the car. It was too dark to make out the details of the people in the car, except that there were 2 of them. We turned around as quickly as we could and raced back up the mountain to try to catch up to the other car, but since it was such a narrow, winding road, turning around was difficult, and we never found them. We both think it was actually us from some alternate reality or timeline that we accidentally crossed over into. My dad, his fishing buddy, and I were driving from Chicago to my uncle's cabin on the Canadian border in Minnesota. My dad and his buddy had been doing this trip for almost 30 years, so they had the route down pat. Leave late, drive all night, and get to the last town before the cabin just after sunrise to have breakfast. The route is pretty much a straight shot, so any deviations end up taking longer. There are several reservations along the route. We were most of the way there, and everything was going normal. We hit a section of road construction that slows us way down. At one point, we get routed to an off-ramp detour that takes us down lower than the level of the highway. As we drop down, we hit the heaviest fog I have ever seen. We could barely see a car length ahead of us, so we slowed down even more. Suddenly, something darts in front of our car, and my dad brakes hard. It was just there for a flash, and we all saw it. It had a short, stocky body with almost no neck and no horns. Its fur was white and a bit shaggy, particularly around the neck and shoulders. Its legs were long and thin, and the way it ran was this weird scrabbling gait. That was the thing the 3 of us kept repeating, how strange it ran. It was like nothing we had ever seen, and it didn't match any animals we knew in these woods, or anywhere. Moments later, the road rose back up to rejoin the expressway, and we left the fog. We continued on our journey, trying to puzzle out what it was. Goat or sheep? Too tall, too big, and too fast. Deer? White, short neck, and a stocky body. No. A white baby buffalo? Too thin and no local wild population, besides being absurdly rare. We get to the last town for breakfast, and we realize the sun hasn't risen yet. The breakfast place isn't even open yet. It is somehow 2 hours earlier than we should have gotten there. We got detoured on a perfectly straight road and somehow got there faster. I have no explanation, and I still get chills thinking about what we saw. I was driving home from work one night, and as I was about to go around a curve, I remembered thinking, one of these days a deer is going to run out in front of me. I shit you, not as soon as it ran through my head, a huge deer jumped out of the tree line. However, once I came to a stop, it didn't look like the deer I saw. The more that I looked at it, the more it looked like a wolf. We made eye contact, and it walked towards my truck a bit, but I took off, terrified. Keep in mind that I live in an area where there's a ton of deer, and it's not unheard of that wolves are around. I've just never seen one around here. This past weekend, my significant other and I were driving through the Wallapai Reservation, west of the Navajo Reservation in NW Oz, near Peachtree. This was during the day around 9 a.m., and I'm almost certain this was not a skinwalker, but in front of us about 100 yards, a massive, black animal, walking like a dog with a huge, bushy tail, crossed the road. When we passed the spot, it was already gone. My boyfriend says it looked like a fox to him, but I'm not sure I've ever heard of an all-black fox, and this thing was Great Dane-sized. I've heard in some cultures that black dogs are omens, and I'm curious to see if anyone else here has any insight into what I saw. I know skinwalkers are solely part of Navajo culture, but are they able to travel to nearby reservations or areas? Did I really only see a big black fox? We were driving back to Flagstaff from Sedona at about 3 a.m., and there were 3 of us sitting in the front of a small truck. We were having a good time and blasting music, so I think that's why I may have missed it, but my friends, the driver and person sitting in the middle, suddenly went very serious and quiet and rolled up the windows. When I asked what was wrong, the driver asked if we saw anything, to which my other friend replied that he thought he saw something like a goat. The driver explained that he saw an all-white, gangly, hunched-over creature with a face shaped like a shield and 2 horns. He said it wasn't looking in our direction. They saw it on the right side of the road in a small forest clearing, so I feel like it may have been in my blind spot. So, do you guys think that was a crawler? I've never heard of any with a face shape like that or horns. Also, this wasn't a skinwalker or anything like that. We're all Navajo and are certain that's not what that was. This isn't my story, it's my mother's from about 10 years ago. How do I put this lightly? My mom was a horrible mom almost my whole life. She dated drug dealers and left her 2 daughters in the care of my grandmother. She was more like the cool friend that would visit me and my sister and give us tasty food than she was actually a mother. During this time, when I was about 10 years old, my mom's current boyfriend was in prison, and she and her friend were taking a road trip up to go see him. We lived in Las Vegas, and the prison was up in northern Nevada. It was a pretty long trip, and my mom stopped with her friend in a tiny motel right before they got on Highway 50. Some background on Route 50 for those of you that don't know. Route 50 has many nicknames, but the most popular are the loneliest road in America and the most haunted road in America. This highway is very long, with mostly nothing on it for a really long way. At one point, you're driving these roads that twist and turn with a cliff right next to you. Anyway, so my mother and her friend stop at this tiny motel to get some rest before driving on Route 50. My mom's friend, let's call her Jessica, was really into tarot cards and wanted to do a reading before they went to sleep. The card said things along the lines of don't trust your close friend, be careful, you're in danger. Stuff like that. Feeling a little bit freaked out but not really caring down, but as soon as she turned the corner, the lights vanished. There were no vehicles, people, or emergency vehicles. She thought this was weird and was really freaked out at this point, but she kept driving anyway, more than anything, just wanting to get to the prison. She drove for a while longer, with nothing worth mentioning happening. Just as she was almost done driving the mountain route, she saw something on the road. She tells me it looked humanoid, hunched over, and about 5 feet tall. She panicked and swerved to avoid hitting it. To her right was a 50-foot cliff. She couldn't stop in time, and she drove off the cliff. She remembers that Jessica hadn't put her seat belt on, so she reaches over to put her arm across to try and hold her down, but as she looks over to Jessica, her eyes are wide and she is smiling straight at her. She has this wide, manic smile on her face. She doesn't remember exactly what happened next, just that she woke up at the bottom of the cliff. Jessica had been thrown from the car, and my mom's ribs, both ankles, and nose were broken. She gets out of the car and begins to scream for Jessica. It was pitch black out here and cloudy, so not even the moon was helping her see. She crawled around, desperate to help her friend. She should have died. My mom heard a voice say, and she tells me that it sounded like two people talking at once in a crackly voice. She says it was right in her ear, but she could not see or feel anything around her. My mom was terrified, and all she could think of was getting to the road. With 2 broken ankles and broken ribs, she happened to pull herself up the cliff, filled with adrenaline and terror. She finally made it to the road, and after about an hour of lying there praying, a car full of men making a road trip drove past and stopped to help her. They called for help and found Jessica's body on the desert floor, far from the car, her back broken but still alive. My mom swears up and down that this happened to her and that it was real, and she tells it often to whoever will listen. The part that freaks me out about this is that Jessica swears up and down that she does not remember getting my mom to leave the motel at 3 a.m., and she absolutely did not look at her and smile as they flew off the cliff. So if you find yourself having to drive up Route 50 in Nevada, please do it during the day, and if you see a humanoid creature, do me a favor and run it over. For my mom. My husband and I were driving to see my brothers for Christmas a few years ago. We lived in regional Victoria, Australia, and he lived in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. It was about 2 to 3 a.m. and pitch black. Once we were reasonably close, 4 to 5 hours away, we had to go up and over this mountain or rainforest area in the middle of nowhere to get there. It was raining, misty, and freezing cold, which was weird because it was the middle of summer, and anyone who lives in Australia knows how hot it gets in the summer here. But I figured, rainforests are usually wet and cold? Anyway, we were rounding this really narrow corner, and out of nowhere up beside me was this thing. It looked like it was trying to cross the road, and it stopped and ran back into the woods when we almost hit it. My husband thinks it was a giant koala. He doesn't believe in the paranormal or anything weird, but he didn't get a good look at it like I did. It was right next to me on the passenger side door. To me, it looked like a skinny, lanky person on all fours covered in fur. It had the face of a person and the body of a person, but was walking on its knuckles and legs. Its eyes glowed like a cat's in the dark as our headlights hit it. It freaked me out, and to this day, I still don't know what the hell it was that I saw, but it's burned into my memory. Was it a giant mutant koala? A skinwalker? Yowie? Sasquatch? What do you guys think? On my way back to Baton Rouge from picking up some friends from No La, I was near exit 166 at about 12 to 1 a.m. We were just listening to music, almost home, when I nearly swerved off the road because I saw them. Maybe 100 purplish blue orbs, glowing faintly about 30 feet in the air. I didn't even notice them until I was right at them. None of them moved. It looked like someone took the Milky Way galaxy and placed it there. I immediately said to my friends, "What the duck?" Because, well, what else do you do? They all saw them. I know I'm not crazy. I tried to take a picture out the back window, but iPhones don't pick up faint lights. I was tempted to take an exit and turn around, but there was something so off about them just floating there. They were at varying heights. I couldn't see it wasn't all just a flat plane as I drove under it, but it went all the way across the median and to the other side of the highway. My fiancé's family lived about 5 hours away from us. He would come pick me up from work when I got out at midnight, and we would drive up to go see them on weekends. It is a really long, dark drive, and near the end, it is through twisting, winding roads through the woods. It may have just been me being tired, but sometimes I would notice small, dark shadows like an animal running across the road. I never took too much notice, just assuming I was tired. One night, though, as we were driving through the woods around 3 a.m., we were turning a corner. I suddenly jumped at least a foot in the air and gasped. I saw a dark shadow of a man. He was just standing on the road, and I didn't really have much concern until he hit our windshield. My heart was racing, and I was shaking. It was almost solid and blacker than the road or the woods. It was just a solid mass of shadows. There was no face, and I really didn't see arms, hands, or anything. It hasn't happened since, but I wondered if this has ever happened to anyone else before. It happened in the Richmond, Virginia, area. Further west, but that is the closest large city. A few years ago, I was a university student in Eastern Washington but was dating a girl in Western Washington. I was visiting her for the weekend during the summer when we got into a huge fight around midnight, and I left, deciding to head back to my apartment. I mention this for context as to why I was driving through Snoqualmie Pass after 1 in the morning. I'd never gone through the pass so late before, and what is usually a very busy stretch of freeway on I-90 was completely empty. I went well over an hour without seeing a single vehicle going either way. So naturally, I was driving way too fast. At the time, I had a '73 Chevy Nova. It wasn't quite classic, but it had power and a complete lack of AC. Even though it was late at night, the combination of a warm summer night and the large amount of heat that bleeds through from the engine meant that I had my windows down and was sweating. Not far into the east side of the mountains, around 1:30, I hit a long stretch of straight road that doesn't have an on-ramp or any way to get into the freeway, when suddenly a set of headlights appeared behind me, something like 200 feet back. I glanced back at the lights, puzzled as to where the vehicle could have possibly come from. I noticed that, despite the fact that I was absolutely hauling, the lights were gaining on me. I decided to switch lanes and slow down a bit so it could pass. After a moment, the vehicle, now only half that distance away, moved over behind me into the same lane. This is when I began to panic. I'm in the middle of nowhere, I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour, and now I've got some aggressive drivers running up on me. I watched as those lights got closer. 60 feet. 50 feet. 40 feet. In a few seconds, it was upon me. I braced against the steering wheel, expecting to get rear-ended by a vehicle going much faster than me now. I watched in my rear view mirror in horror as those headlights blasted right into the back of my vehicle, and suddenly everything froze. Quite literally. Nothing physically hit me, but the whole vehicle frosted over, and I could see my breath. I hit the brakes and did my best to pull over despite not being able to see through the windshield. Every hair on my body was standing on end. I got out of my vehicle and paced back and forth, examining my car, which was already starting to defrost as streams of water poured down it. There was no damage to my back bumper, and absolutely no sign of whatever vehicle had hit me. Eventually I calmed down enough to get back in the car and drive the rest of the way back, wake my roommates, and explain what had just happened. The next time I drove through the area in the daylight, right about where I think the ghost car had hit me, there was a very old wooden cross somewhat overgrown on the side of the road. I drove my dad back home from my grandma's place, and the road you have to take is surrounded by woods, and there are barely any houses. There's a crossroad where the path splits into two. One continues to be asphalt, and another is gravel roads. Anyway, when we came close enough, we saw a black hooded figure standing on the side. He or she/it was wearing a huge cloak all the way to the ground and was facing away from us. I just drove past, shocked, and asked my dad if he saw it. He dismissed it and said I should keep driving, but he was clearly nervous. I lived in an extremely rural town in upstate New York. My house was on top of a hill where it was just my house, and then the freeway, town, was a 5-minute drive away. Keep in mind that all we had was one stoplight and a school, pre-K through 12 with approximately 300 students in it. And one little pizza joint. Well, I met a girl that I really liked from a different school through one of the jobs that I did, and we started dating. The road to her house was this little back road, dirt, surrounded by trees. If you went faster than 30 on this road, you were going to hit a deer. That was just a fact of life. So at night, you had to go even slower because deer are more active at night. I picked her up from her house to bring her back to mine for the night. It was already dark out. I couldn't tell you the exact time because it was a while ago, but it was completely black outside. Well, on the way back, we were on this little dirt road with no housing on it. I'm telling you, this was basically a path. And we stopped driving because things get heated and we can't wait any longer. I'm leaning over and kissing her neck for a few minutes when she looks out the window, and she alerts me to a man with a beard sitting down on the edge of the woods looking at the window of the car right at us. I could still give a full description of this man because of how much it stunned me. Long beard, hood up, flannel, and dark-colored jeans. Little to say, I wasn't back in my seat and floored my little Hyundai Elantra down the road a ways. Neither of us will ever forget it, and it was the creepiest thing we've ever seen. I used to live in Louisville, Colorado. One day, I'm driving around, and I hear a very loud female human scream. I start driving in that direction to see if anyone needs help. When I got close to where I'd heard the sound, a coyote walked across the street on its hind legs. It's taller than me, so it's over 3x the size of the other coyotes in the area. As it walks by, it looks straight into my eyes and screams again. Its screams were so loud that they hurt my ears and made me jump. Its eyes glowed momentarily, but that was probably reflections from my headlights. As I drove past, it dropped to all fours and ran off. This wasn't exactly in the middle of nowhere, either. It was in the middle of the town, close to hotels, restaurants, and the golf course, only a few miles from some neighborhoods and schools. Still, I have never heard of anyone else encountering a creature like this in that area before or since. Animal control asked me if it was possible that someone was wearing a costume. We're leaving our friend's campsite in an area we were unfamiliar with. We get to this weird split where it's 5 ways and the GPS isn't super clear because of backwoods Kentucky. We ultimately make a wrong turn, but the GPS is silent. So we keep going. The husband says, "We need to turn around." The GPS flashed quickly and set the new route. I said, "Let's just go. It's got a route, let's just get out of here. It's only like 10 minutes further." So this road is full of kinky, swooshy, twisty, and turny roads. We're in a Nissan Armada that we rented. Usually, if my husband were mad, he'd be speeding through the hills like a madman trying to get out of there. But he wasn't. We were talking through it and keeping him calm, and he was taking the corners extremely slowly because they were massive drop-offs with no guardrails. Oncoming traffic is whipping around corners at us. It was scary. So we went slowly. We come around this particularly sharp bend with a hill in the middle of it, and we see two dogs laying down. It looks like the kind you'd see at the statues at the end of the driveway. Except they're lying perpendicular to the dirt driveway, and they don't move. They don't move, and then their eyes catch our headlights. As our headlights hit them, we realized, my son, husband, and myself, that the dogs were identical. Remember, we're taking this corner slowly? We got a good long look, especially me, because they were on my side. Identical. Anyway, as our headlights hit their eyes, they stood up at exactly the same time, and like a ducking marching band, they started on the same pause, walking toward our car at the same time. I have massive amounts of chills just typing that. So that was a super sharp left, okay? Where the dogs were. As we go to do the adjacent right turn, I'm still looking at the dogs because they were right outside my door. I was transfixed and creeped out. I look forward again, just in time to see something run across the street. I yelled, "Deer!" instinctively. But when I thought about it, that was no deer. Deer don't move that fast. I've seen plenty of deer crossing the road. The husband got a better look at it as he wasn't looking at the dogs. He said it looked like something super emaciated, maybe hunched over, but on four legs? It was ducking fast too, man. I just saw four legs in a flash. Jake said it had green, glowing eyes. You freaked me the duck out. It took us another 45 minutes to get back to some sort of main highway. And it was just hairpin, windy, and twisty the whole way. So my husband was going super slow. Dude, we were freaked. I just kept talking very slowly in a low voice because I couldn't even start Spotify on my phone without ducking up the GPS. So no music, no happiness. I just freaked out while driving in Backhasswood, Kentucky. Thankfully, that was it, and we made it. Oh, I did see two deer. And they ran. And there is no way that other thing was a deer. I was driving a backcountry road tonight, and on my passenger side in the ditch ahead of me, I saw someone walking about 100 to 200 feet in front of me. It was pretty dark, and I only saw them for a split second. It kind of freaked me out because they were walking so close to the road, and I didn't want to hit them. Then they were just gone. I slowed and looked where I had seen them walking, and there was a bouquet of flowers strapped to the post of a sign. It definitely freaked me out a little. Not me, but my cousin shared a story that terrified me. There is a long and quite isolated road that connects two towns together. To the right is moorland that leads to the mountains, and to the left are farmers' fields. There are very few lights on this road, which makes it incredibly dark, and there are a number of fatalities every year. Due to the high fatalities associated with this road, it tends to be quiet during the evening, and little to no cars travel along here after dusk. My cousin works as a district nurse on the evening service, and this road is her quickest route home. She doesn't scare easily and is an experienced driver, so this road doesn't faze her. One night, she was coming back along the road at about 11:30 p.m. and noticed a girl hunched over the side of the road. She thought it was odd, as pedestrians were never seen on this road, and there were no cars nearby that could have belonged to the girl. My cousin immediately pulled over, thinking the girl may need help. She got out of her car and started walking towards the girl. My cousin immediately regretted this and started to get a terrible feeling that she couldn't shake. She hesitated for a minute and stopped to take extra notice of the girl. She appeared to be wearing a very old-fashioned cloak and was hunched over, looking at the ground. As she got closer, the girl turned to look at her, and what she saw was terrifying. The girl had no facial features at all. There were no eyes, noses, or lips, and it was just a blank face staring at her. My cousin completely froze and felt sudden dread. She knew what she was seeing was not of this world. She quickly ran back to her car and locked all her doors. She then looked in her rearview mirror to see that the girl had completely disappeared. My cousin proceeded to drive quickly to the next town and called her office to explain what she had seen. A colleague was nearby and drove to the spot where the girl was seen and could find no trace of her. A few weeks later, another colleague witnessed the same thing but did not have time to get out of the car as the girl completely vanished in front of her eyes. I live in southwestern Montana. My work requires me to travel from job to job, sometimes it's really in the middle of nowhere. Last week, I was working up closer to the mountains, and it's pretty desolate. The houses are very few and far in between. Anyhow, I left one of the houses I had been working at. I turned onto this long, straight road. It's been snowy as hell, and the sun was setting against my eyes. I saw something in the distance, dark and enormous. Bigger than a horse. Bigger than a cow. It was off to the side of the road, walking slowly. As I began to get a bit closer, the figure turned around and started racing towards me. I have been spending the last month ducking reading Skinwalker, Wendigo, and supernatural stories on here, so I was definitely freaking out. I thought, well, this is what I get when I read these damn stories. The law of attraction is real. I die today. I slowed to a crawl in my car. Dread curled in my stomach, and chills ran down my neck. As the figure became closer and clearer, guess what the duck it was? It was some lady driving a mother ducking chariot pulled by her massive horse. She was galloping along the road and happily waved to me with a big smile on her face. What the duck? I fully thought I was going to have some terrible experiences. I wanted to add to these stories anyhow, though. I'm sorry if this is disappointing at all, but you should have seen my face when I realized what it was. Freaky stuff is going on in the NT. So I was with my dad and a few of his friends, sitting around drinking beer, when we got on the topic of freaky shit. I told my Darwin story, and my dad told a couple I've never heard before. The first was from about 25-ish years ago, when he was driving road trains between Port Augusta, Alice Springs, and Cloncurry. He said that he pulled up at a truck bay at about 10:30 p.m. and got out to go for a leak and check the trailers. He got to the fourth trailer, and then he said he got a GTFO feeling. When he got to Cloncurry, he said he was talking with some other truckies, and they all said there's something evil there, not at the stop, but about 50 meters off the road in a turkey's nest dam. The next one comes from the Devil's Marbles. So he was driving around them, following the road, when the radio, and clock just stopped. Then there in the truck with him was my great-granddad, who had been deceased for about 4 months, in the passenger's seat. And it was just calm. What should have been a 20-minute section turned into a 3-hour section, and he came out of it dead at midnight. I travel often for work, and I was driving through New Mexico on I-40. I drive about 40 to 50,000 miles a year, and I have never seen anything paranormal. I have driven this route, but not for about 4 years. I'm driving west on I-40, and out of the blue, I spotted a blur moving down the hill or mountain at a ridiculously fast speed. In a span of about 5 seconds, my brain did its best to make sense of what I was seeing. The coyote was the first thing that came to mind. The way it was moving looked like a canine. The next thing I realized was that this thing was huge. Maybe the size of a horse. I've often seen horses run down the fence lines on hills, and that was my next thought. But the shape was wrong. The speed was also way off. This creature was flying down the side of this mountain. The whole time, I'm really not feeling anything but confusion, and nothing is really registering as off just because it's happening so fast. I have a thought that we are going to meet at a point about 200 to 300 yards down the road. So I think to myself that when I drive by, I'll get a closer look. When I passed where we should have met, there was nothing. No fence, no houses, nothing to explain a horse. There was no sign of the animal. It just ran through a portal or something. There were no shrubs, trees, or anything else that could have hidden the animal. At this point, I had a very eerie sense of dread, like I had to get away. I pulled into a gas station about 30 minutes down the road. This is what really creeped me out. I felt like I couldn't trust anyone. I had this uncomfortable feeling of mistrust and suspicion. I felt like everyone I came across knew what I saw. Normal everyday people, it's like I felt I was going to run into someone or something dangerous. I drove on through Gallup, up to Shiprock, and into Cortez. I can't shake the feeling of fear and couldn't bring myself to shower late at night in a strange hotel. I've never been one to believe in paranormal stories, but I just can't explain to myself what this was. I keep thinking about it, and I just can't logically explain it. Horse-sized wolf/canine Dari gray hair with a white belly. Fast. Extremely fast. Has anyone ever seen anything similar in the area? I'm from Texas and have never been around reservations or Native America much. I'm just very confused and would like to hear about anything similar. My ex-husband may have seen a skinwalker one night. He worked the overnight shift in the big city of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Well, Santa Fe is bigger than the small village we were from, which had 2-lane roads to travel to get to the main highways. He would leave our house at 10 p.m. to get to work by 11 p.m. one night. I got a frantic call from him when he arrived at work. He sounded almost hysterical. He said he was driving down the usual road to get to the highway and came up to what he thought was a cow sitting in the middle of the road, like they do sometimes. He slammed his brakes on and honked his horn, annoyed that he was going to be late. He waited a bit and honked again, and the cow stood up, but he realized it was standing up on its hind legs. Then he realized it wasn't a cow. Maybe it was a coyote or a wolf. He then saw that it was a naked man as it turned to face him. But the head was that of a dog. The creature slammed its hands on the hood of the car and then bounded off into the hills in 3 steps. He couldn't make out where it went, but my ex said he drove as fast as he possibly could to get out of the area and to the well-lit highway. Once he arrived at work 20 minutes later, he called me, not making much sense. When he calmed down a bit, we both tried to make out what he possibly could have seen. Even years later, we'd talk about it once in a while. Maybe a dog man? Maybe a drunken man wearing a mask? It wasn't until years later that we came up with the possibility of a SW. Maybe it was just some distortion of the darkness and headlights during late-night driving. Maybe he was hypnotized by the driving, but he still thinks he saw something out of the ordinary. I was driving home from work about a month or so ago and was heading down this typically busy side street in Douglas County, Colorado, called Havana. It's kind of close to the Centennial Airport, in a business district, surrounded by apartments. It was about 1:30 a.m., and there wasn't a lot of traffic out, just a Jeep in front of me. I was driving around a bend in the road where Dry Creek turns into Havana. I saw in my peripheral vision this figure to my right by the sidewalk, standing between 2 small trees held up by wire supports. The creature was standing kind of behind them. At first glance, I figured it was just a big, slender dog, like a white greyhound or Great Dane, that escaped and seemed to be standing and barking at traffic by the sidewalk. I was going about 45 miles per hour when I passed, and it was dark out. But I noticed as I began to pass by that it appeared to have a humanoid-shaped head with black eyes, a bent-over hunched back, long slender legs, and an unusually wide stretched mouth, like it was screaming or something. I thought to myself, yo, what was that? So I slowed down quickly to look back, and in my mirror, I saw the creature turn around and run off towards a fence or brick retaining wall on the other side of the sidewalk. But as it ran off, I saw how tall and slender the creature was. It seemed very pale, almost gray, with a kind of anorexic and bony appearance. It also moved strangely, where its hind leg joints were inverted and bent in the opposite direction from its front legs. At that point, I was seriously creeped out. The Jeep in front of me had also slowed down, so I could only assume they saw it too. We both continued driving because it was late or early and we couldn't stop in the middle of a busy road, but that situation really made my skin crawl. I kept checking my mirrors for the rest of the drive home and debating if I should have called a non-emergency line to have an officer check it out, but I told myself they would think I was just an idiot. Now, every night when I take that road, I look around to see if I can spot it again. I really want to believe it was just a dog, but I can't stop thinking about how strange and quickly it moved with its backwards knees and how long or wide its mouth stretched. I haven't talked about this much except to some family and my coworker because, quite frankly, it just sounds ridiculous. I'm just wondering what I actually saw. And if it's something I should even be talking about, or if I should continue to pretend I never saw anything and just moved on with my life. So when I was about in 7th or 8th grade, me and my mom were driving home from a therapy approach of mine. Note, nothing for being schizoid, just depression and such. It was winter and a full moon, because I remember the snow glowing under the moon. It was only 6 but really dark out because, it was in the middle of winter. So we are going about 55 miles per hour when this thing crosses and stops in front of us. The only way I can describe it is as if you combined a deer, a dog, and a human. It stood about as tall as our windshield, it had the legs of what I can describe as a deer, its back was hunched over, and it was walking on all fours. It had the head of a dog. Note, it didn't have ears or a dog nose, but its eyes were white, and it didn't have a tail. The freakish thing about this creature was its skin. It wasn't a canine with mange or anything. It had actual human skin all the way down its legs, too long to be dog legs. It smelled like rotting meat, and some parts of the flesh were broken open like if you were scraping your knee. It was pale white, and you could see its veins. And this thing was fast, like it stood there and just ran across the road in the blink of an eye. Me and my mom had to pull over to calm down. We both saw it. This sighting was in southeastern Ohio, between Gallipolis and Athens. Thanks to someone, I believe what I saw was a crawler. I haven't seen the creature since, but it still haunts me to this day, and on that highway, I'm scared to see it again. This happened back in the summer of 2013, when I was 13. My mom and I were in Florida visiting my grandma and aunt. After spending the week or so at grandma's place in Odessa, we drove north to St. Augustine to spend the next week at a hotel by the beach and visit my aunt as well. On the second night, we were driving to pick up my aunt, who was working the night shift at Denny's. On the drive, there was a guy walking down the road with his back facing us with a backpack and all. Possibly homeless. It was dark and right by a stretch of woods, so my mom didn't see him at first and nearly hit him. When she notices and swerves to avoid the vehicular manslaughter charges, I look out the window to see who this guy is. Nothing about the guy walking seemed out of the ordinary, it's what I saw behind him that still sticks with me. It was this humanoid creature that was crouched down, looking like it might have already been eating something. Keep in mind I was in a moving vehicle, so I couldn't get the best look at it, but it almost looked to have old, ripped up clothes on and a bit of hair on its head, like a human. But it's the eyes, they were huge. They glowed too, like when you see an animal's eyes looking at you at night. When it looked up, it snarled, and I could almost see its teeth. They looked sharp, like they could bite right through you with no effort. Its skin was almost white with a tint of green, and it looked skinny and long. Knees up to its head when crouching. It had to have been no more than 10 feet away from the pedestrian walking on the side of the road. It took me a minute to register what the duck I just saw and if it was even what I thought it was, which I still, almost 9 years later, couldn't tell you. I was just quiet and in shock for the rest of the night. My mom, aunt, and I went back to the hotel room. They drank and caught up, while I just tried to watch TV and not think about what I saw that night. I still don't know what I saw. My knowledge of Florida cryptids is very limited, and I don't think it was a skinwalker since they are more in the southwest part of the US than the southeast. If anyone has any ideas, please let me know. I'm pretty sure I was a senior in high school, so it was around 2011. My group of friends and I were always obsessed with haunted or creepy things and places. I think our interest began as kids. So naturally, when we heard about Downington's twin tunnels, we were psyched to go. This place is still on a drivable road, it's 2 attached tunnels, one active and one completely grown over with brush and water. Kind of like a swamp. They are pretty long and curved, so there is a point in the tunnel where no light can enter, making it pitch black. Legend has it that there have been some deaths and murders there. So according to folklore, if you walk through the tunnels at night, you emerge from the other end with scratches on your arms. Or, if you drive through it, as we did, you could hear the feet of the suicidal pregnant woman dangling on the top of your car. So we go. I'm driving. We drive through a few times, park in the middle, turn the lights or car off, roll down the windows, and wait to see anything. It's a bust at first, and since I'm driving, I'm ready to call it a night, but a friend eagerly says one more try. Closer, and I'm so freaked out that I instinctually turned the car on, the lights flashed on, and the thing vanished. I immediately turn to my friend, and he says, "Did you just see that?" And I reply, "Yes." Although it feels nice to have another person validate what I have just seen, it has left me completely uneasy for years. So I'm asking anyone out there, can you explain this? Have you ever seen anything like that? Mom and I saw a translucent creature run across the road. She was driving, I was in the passenger seat, and I saw this super weird thing out of the corner of my eye start to run, almost glide, across the road from the left. It looked like a deer or a dog, it was small and thin and a weird shade of brown, but also kind of translucent. I only saw it for a split second, and I pulled an all-nighter last night, so I immediately assumed I had imagined it and kept talking before my mom turned her head to look behind her and said, "What the duck was that?" She hadn't seen it when I had, but she saw it run behind the car in her mirror. She described it as a small, deer-like animal that, to her, looked more like a shadow than a physical being, and said it was almost gliding across the road. There were cars very close behind us and beside us, and none of them reacted in any way. I also found that when I was trying to recall what it looked like to describe what I saw to her, it was as if I had seen it in a dream, like the image was really distorted. Even now, it almost feels like a fake memory. I don't know how to explain it, it's just very abnormal. My mom also agreed that if I wasn't in the car, she would have thought it was her imagination. It was very blurry and strange in a way that's hard to describe. Honestly, I was just wondering if anyone has any kind of explanation for this or if this is maybe some known phenomenon. I'm not a huge believer in paranormal stuff, but, it was definitely ducking weird. So a while back, around the summer of 2016, I want to say. I was driving at night to my security job, so I took the back roads because it was easier. As I was driving down this road, which was like in the middle of farmland, the crops were wheat or something, it looked like tall grass to me. Something ran across the road in front of me, and I hit my brakes pretty hard and kind of scooted towards the side of the road, almost hitting a telephone pole. I was freaking out a bit, and I thought I hit something, which I didn't. I checked later. I looked around, and I made eye contact with a creature I thought was a dog until it stood up a bit more to look at me. It was a dark creature with big eyes that looked like a dog in the face but had barely any hair. Its legs were long, and its ears were big. I'm not sure how long it and I stared at each other, but it slowly backed away with its back hunched into the field. I remember being scared like crazy, and to this day, I cannot tell you what it was. I remember getting to work and asking my coworkers. They thought I was making up for being late. But I hope someone out there can tell me what I saw. A few years later, I was out hunting with a friend when we lost legal light. So we hiked back to the truck and hit the road in his parents' new Ford half-ton, the ones with the sensors all over the vehicle. We had some music playing as we were just heading back towards town again, when the music started acting weird and cutting in and out with static, so me being in the passenger seat, I disconnected the Bluetooth and reconnected the phone. The music cleared up, and we continued down the road. We got up to the KM board on the road where my previous encounter took place, and I mentioned, "Oh, hey, that's the whistle block that we logged a couple years ago." Half jokingly because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. My friend replied, "Guri-iat, thanks for that," as I had told him the story before. We continued slowly driving down the road because it gets pretty rough in a couple spots and the road has a few sharp turns and an S-bend. Well, we go about a kilometer further, and the music starts screeching and doing what we can only describe as alien noises. So I disconnect the Bluetooth again, and my friend says, "Oh, Mom's got a cord in here." So he stops and gets the cord for me. I plug the phone in and play music again. Another kilometer down the road, and the phone goes ape, I mean, loud alien squealing that sounds similar to that SHT dial-up internet noise from the 90s. We had started into the S-bend when this was happening, and we shut the music off completely as we were driving still, making one half of the S-turn, and then we both looked up from the music deck or screen, and the headlight illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. So we swerve and take the ditch a bit, still going probably 30 kilometers per hour, and get the truck back up on the road. We continue coasting down the road, as we are both in awe after just seeing a flash of this thing. I finally say, after what seemed like 5 quiet minutes, "Man, did you just see?" My friend cuts me off and says, "A F-kin skeleton in the middle of the road?" I say, "Yeah, like a white rib cage, and a deer skull for a face?" He finishes. I said, "Turn around. What the FCK was that? Does someone need our help?" Not thinking that we are in the middle of nowhere, with no vehicles around or any that we had passed from other hunters. It was early season and no one bow hunts here anyways. My friend said, "I'm not turning around, I feel sick. I'm going to throw up." And he continued driving. We didn't see another vehicle until we hit the pavement again. It was taller than the pickup by easily a couple feet. I'm 6 feet 1 inch and my forehead is at the top of the window for reference. It is black surrounding the white of the bones, with long arms stretched to its sides as if it were saying, "Try and hit me." I watched this thing pass the passenger window and stared up at it as we wailed by it, and it was definitely three-dimensional, tall with long arms, and dark. Dead looking. Like light was sucked into it without reflecting anything. It is hard to explain. When we hit service again, my friend received a text message from his mother saying, "What did you two idiots hit in my brand new truck?" I guess the new Ford send near accident reports to the owner when the sensors pick up something? I'm an old school Chevy guy, so I don't know. The only thing I can find online that resembles what we both saw is a Wendigo without the antlers. Or the headlights didn't illuminate them anyway. I live in Southwest Virginia, just within the Appalachian area. Some friends and I took a day trip to West Virginia, specifically the area around Bluefield. We were exploring abandoned buildings and such when we found ourselves on this sketchy mountain road. Full disclaimer, I do not know the name of this road, but I'll try to find out. It was very thin, very rough, and riddled with potholes. At one point, we actually feared that our car was too wide to take one of the curves, which was literally on the edge of a cliff. Anyway, we ended up passing an active blasting zone sign. The actual road that the sign was pointing to was blocked by a small rope, so we took a left and kept going. Halfway down this super steep mountain road, we noticed this thick yellow fog sort of creeping over the horizon behind us. It stayed pretty low to the ground and rolled as it spread down the mountain. We all freaked out and rolled the windows up, and our car was quickly engulfed in the yellow fog. It was so thick you could see streaks as it rolled around us. We didn't smell, hear, or see anything as the fog passed our car. We were driving very slowly, no radio, windows down, so I'm hesitant to think this was dust from some explosion. It just silently covered us, and after a few moments, it moved past our car and dissipated. Any clues? In May of 2019, me and my husband Jay were visiting the NC Mountains to celebrate his birthday. We had just planned a drive to go sightseeing for a couple of days but then decided to take a walk down the Pigeon Creek Trail at Mingo Falls. A friend had told us about the waterfalls. We got there early, around 8:45, and there were no cars or people, so we parked and started the walk up the long steps. When we arrived at the waterfall, we immediately saw a monster. It was a wild man, and he was naked and had bushy body hair. His face was deformed and lumpy. He was skinny but tall, and we could see his chest. His ribs were sticking out. The bottom half of the naked body was more hairy than the top half. The arms looked longer than they should have been. Odd-shaped head. My husband described him as being mangled and deformed. I said, "James, what is that up there?" And as soon as I said that, we both started smelling something awful, like garbage and vomit. We stared at him for a second, and we saw the man's eyes were white and cloudy, like he had cataracts. He seemed evil, and we were startled that we saw him. He was just standing there. The thing was carrying an old blanket in its hand, and it was dragged into the water. Like a little child's blanket because we saw colors in the blanket, but the blanket was wet and dirty. We watched him for a second, and then he crouched down at the top of the waterfall and disappeared into it as if it had dropped down into some bunker. We turned around, went back to our car, and continued to look around us. We were scared. We know it was not a Bigfoot, and we know it was a man. The legs were wet too, because all his leg hair was wet. It was about 6.5 feet tall. He was hairy, but we could still see his skin under the hair. I saw his chest and ribs. It was just like a hairy, deformed, and mangled man. Cloudy white eyes. Big hands. He had full dark facial hair but looked a little bald on top of his head, with long strands of hair too. We were going to check out the casino in Cherokee, North Carolina, later that day, but we decided to go home after that. We believe it was a Wildman monster. This story happened to my sister, who is a traveling registered nurse. Her occupation takes her all over the Navajo Nation reservation. So most times her husband, when he is available, will drive her from and to her next shift. She worked the night shift mostly. They have never shared a ghost story before this or since. It was between 2:45 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the summer. If you're from the res, you know that most nights are arid with a slight cool breeze. Well, she had finished her shift in Tuba City sometime around midnight, and her husband was driving. Her next job was in Chinle, Oz, so they decided to go through Kienta. They were driving on that stretch of desolate highway between Round Rock and Lukachukai. The streetlights from the homes are scattered on the horizon, miles away or apart, and most times they are just pitch black. She was half asleep but alert because of all the caffeine in her system and the fact that she is used to being awake all night because of her job. They had not seen another vehicle for an hour or so and were not familiar with the area, having only driven through it a few times. She said they were driving on the road, and in front of them, probably about a football field's length, she noticed something splattered across the two-lane highway. She said it was dark. Road kills or dead livestock on the road are a common thing on the reservation due to poor fencing and highway maintenance. She figured it looked familiar and not too out of place, but as they got closer, she said she remembered the shimmer of the dark matter, like wet pavement. She thought to herself, it must be recent blood splatter if it is still wet. Her eyes began darting across the landscape and trying to assess the damage, looking for the animal carcass. The blood puddle spanned the width of the highway, and she thought it had to have been from a large animal like a cow or horse. But she couldn't locate the large, bloated carcass of any livestock. Something didn't feel right. As rural as the location was and how recent the seemingly wet blood was, she figured no one could have been there that quickly to dispose of the roadkill. As soon as she came to this conclusion in her head, she said her instincts took over. She felt like someone kicked her in the stomach, like the ground falling out beneath you or the way you feel dropping on a roller coaster, but no joyous emotion. It felt bad or evil. She jolted upright and began trying to scan the dark horizon for any clues. Her husband later said he didn't want to scare her but came to the same conclusion silently to himself. She said her blood froze and her heart skipped a beat when she made out a silhouette slowly rising on the left shoulder of the highway. Her mind begins to race with what it could possibly be. We haven't passed any vehicles in a long time, and we are far from the nearest residence. What could be out in the middle of nowhere this late and this isolated? It was standing upright and facing the opposite direction. Her husband begins to speed up as they near it. She doesn't want to look because everything about this situation seems wrong, and she doesn't want to see something she can't unsee. Too late, it's in her peripheral, and she doesn't want to close her eyes because she said that would be more terrifying. Her eyes stay straight ahead, But her curiosity gets the best of her, and her eyes wander off to the left. As the headlights hit the silhouette, almost full, she said it looked like a person standing there wrapped in a white sheet. A white sheet that has been splattered with blood. The figure stands completely stoic, not flinching or shuddering from the lights of the vehicle. The figure seems to have shoulder-length black hair that looks jaggedly cut. She said that the way the hair hung off the head of the figure, it looked matted or greasy and not free-flowing or clean. They are passing the figure, her husband trying to stay on the pavement but the furthest away from the left shoulder that the road will allow. She can't make out the face because the figure's head is bowed down and the hands are out in front of it in a prayer stance. Neither of them speaks. Her mind is rushing with thoughts like, what if the vehicle stops working? Or what if whatever that was starts chasing us? Who would be able to help us? They make it to the intersection towards many farms. A sigh of relief. That's one of the reasons Navajo elders tell you to never drive after dark or really late. One day, about a year and a half ago, I was driving back home from college for fall break. To get home, I take the interstate for about half the way. I was pretty accustomed to the roads and the way to get home, but I still used my GPS to make sure I didn't miss a specific turn before the interstate, which I had missed when I first got to school a few times. I just liked the reassurance. So anyway, my GPS was still on as I merged onto what I was 100% sure was the interstate going east to get home. I noted the signs, and even my GPS said I was, in fact, going the correct way. But the road I merged onto was very odd, no other cars were on it. It looked brand new, smooth, perfect paved roads, and had shiny new light posts every 5 feet on either side, which the interstate does not have. I should probably note that this was also around 11 a.m., so I had perfect vision of the road. I start to get kind of creeped out by the fact that I am the only car on this road when suddenly I notice my GPS map picture is showing I'm driving through an uncharted sort of forest. There is no known road to it, but it continues to say when I should take an exit, as if I really were on the interstate. I start to freak out and look at my surroundings, and I even slowed down to about 50. Hey, nobody was behind me, so what does it matter? It looks to be the familiar interstate, with 3 lanes going in either direction and trees flanking both sides. I was not seeing any opportunities to get off at an exit, there were no turnoffs on my side, but I noticed one going back towards my college's city, where I merged on. So having no other options, I illegally turned around in one of those police-only U-turn sections things you sometimes see and raced the duck out of there. I finally came to an exit, the only one, it seemed, and got back to civilization. I drove back around and found the real interstate, full of traffic and exits, and got home without any other problems. To this day, I have no idea where I was or how I got there. I have never seen that turn-off since, and honestly, if I got on it again, I'd be trapped in the twilight zone. I've mentioned this to some of my friends at college, but they say they've never seen this mysterious road. Now I quadruple check to make sure I'm going on the correct road beforehand. My boyfriend, 18, saw something he couldn't explain. It was New Year's Eve, and he was driving home after our date night, so it was around 1 a.m. I was laying in bed scrolling on my phone when I got a call from him. I didn't think anything of it, assuming he was calling because he was bored on his drive home or something. I was kind of half asleep when he told me he just saw something terrifying and didn't know what to do. He said, "Listen, I know this sounds insane, and I can't tell anyone else because no one will believe me, but I'm scared." Something you should know about my boyfriend is that he does not get scared often. He's rational, he views everything with statistics and science. He doesn't believe in the paranormal. I thought he was just ducking with me, he was trying to scare me or something. I told him to explain what happened. I was driving down the interstate and I saw this deer, but it wasn't a deer. It was ducking huge. At first, I thought it was just a really big deer, but as I got closer, I realized deer don't get that big. Elk don't even get that big. It was at this point that I realized he was telling the truth. His voice was shaking, and he was talking frantically. I've never heard him that scared before. He continued. It was hunched over, it looked like a man, a really big ducking man, but it had deer antlers and fur all over it. I thought I was tweaking until I looked in my rear view mirror after I drove past it, and it was still there and other cars were swerving away from it. That night, he didn't sleep, he kept a loaded gun by his bed and watched the security cameras around his house all night. Last night, we were talking about it again. As he was talking, his eyes were darting around, and he would check behind us every 30 seconds or so. He gave me a better description of it. It stood about 8 feet tall, and it looked like a man hunched over with his hands on the ground. It had a human face and massive deer antlers. Standing upright, it probably would have been about 12 feet tall. It was covered in fur and stood deer-like. It was standing on the side of the interstate, Just watching the cars go by. Here is where shit gets wild. His house is about a mile from the interstate, with some woods separating them. He's explored these woods before. He was telling me about a bridge in the woods that he's explored before, and it shouldn't technically be there. Every bridge in the state of Kentucky is registered with a serial number. This one wasn't. He described it as looking brand new. There was no rust, the stone and metal were pristine, and there was no graffiti. Under the bridge, there was a tunnel. This tunnel would logically be a drainage tunnel, but it was always bone dry. He doesn't know how long it is, but he knows it is at least 2 miles long. He said it has been a couple of years since he's been there, and he doesn't want to go back. He thinks the thing he saw is from there. He said bridges are supposed to be registered, but they aren't in the Kentucky registry. Everything about the bridge is just wrong, and something about it reminded him of the thing he saw on the interstate. He told me there's only been one other experience in his life that was like this one. It was right when he turned 17, and he was out alone hunting in the woods. If you've never been hunting before, you can see the woods wake up around you. As the sun rises, the birds wake up, the squirrels come out and run around, and the deer come out for dinner, since they're nocturnal. He told me this time that nothing was there. The birds weren't chirping, there was nothing in sight. The leaves were still, there was no wind, and everything was dead silent except the sound of his own breath. It was around noon, and he decided something was off and left to go home. He told me he didn't think much of it then, but now it genuinely scares him to think of that day. Has anyone ever seen anything like this before? I don't know if it was a Wendigo or someone pulling a prank, but I know I've never heard my boyfriend sound like that before. I believe him. I believe there was something there that night that was unexplainable, and I need someone to confirm we aren't crazy. I need some sort of explanation. I'm a singer, so late nights are common for me. This night, I was driving myself and my 4 bandmates home from a show. It's about a 2-hour drive. We're jamming out to the radio and talking, and everything is fine. Until I get to the road that's over a big lake in our state. As soon as I hit that bridge, I felt uneasy. I didn't want to look like a weenie, so I didn't say anything to everyone else. Until I saw the guy walking on the shoulder of the bridge, which is practically non-existent. I swerve a little to miss him, and the guys start asking if I was okay and why I swerved. When I said it was to miss the guy, everyone went, "What guy?" So I described him. He had on a dark jacket, camo cargo pants, dark shoes, and wet hair. No one saw him, and they laughed it off. I saw him again just a few feet ahead and pointed him out, but no one saw him. I'm freaking out because he's there. A few miles ahead, I see him again. This time my drummer saw him too, and he said I wasn't kidding and described his face because he turned this time. He described exactly what I saw. I started driving faster, and he showed up every few miles. He'd turn his head and grin at this scary ass. I almost started crying. I'm a girl with mad anxiety and a heart condition, so I was struggling to calm down. Anyway, once we got to the woods past the bridge, I thought we'd be fine, but he kept appearing until we got close to town. Then he was gone. I've never seen him again. That was one of the scariest ghost encounters I've had. His hair and clothes were wet, so I'm guessing it was the spirit of someone who drowned in the lake and is sticking around to mess with people, but he scared me pretty bad. I was a touring musician in those days. The keyboardist and I were driving about 4 hours from Portland, Maine, to Hillsdale, New York. Partway along our journey, we noticed a road closure. Looking at the map, it was clear that the detour around the closed road would only take about 10 minutes. At this point, our phones, both of which were running separate maps apps, a touring habit, so mistakes or rerouting can be done by the band Hive Mind, indicated we were going to be 45 minutes until we arrived at the venue. Just as expected. I noticed when looking at the GPS map that the detour road we had to take to get back on track had a thin green line running across it, as though the app thought there was a small stretch of national forest land, or actual forest, which interrupted the road. I trusted the detour signs rather than the technology. We followed our little 10-minute detour, all the while watching the map to see when we would cross this curious green line on the map. When we drove up to it, the map indicated that the road had stopped and that this forest, or wormhole, was directly in front of us. Unfortunately, it was just a normal dirt road. No interruption. No forest is blocking the path. No swirling purple vortex. We continued on the road and suddenly lost all service. We had had plenty of signal up to this point. We were in a somewhat rural location, but not so removed that there was a significant cellular dead zone, like those you experience out in the desert or in very rural, very wild places. We kept driving for about 5 minutes, and lo and behold, we reconnected with the road we were supposed to be on, just as expected. Taking a right onto the road, as the maps had indicated, our signal came back. The Maps apps then showed us something curious. We were now 2 hours and 15 minutes from our destination. I went back into the recent destinations on each of our phones to see if we had inputted an incorrect address on either phone initially. We had not. This freaked us out for the remaining 2:15 it took to get to the gig, which we arrived at just in time to hop on stage, having missed the sound check and chill time pre-show. The keyboardist has brushed it off after a few weeks. He can put blinders on and focus on what matters. I am still convinced that this was a glitch in reality, a fracture in the quantum fabric. This happened when I was trying to make the 19-hour drive from Connecticut to Florida without stopping to sleep. I was on I-95 South just after midnight somewhere in South Carolina, and I was about 100 miles away from running out of gas. I saw a sign that said there was a gas station at the next exit, so I got off. The exit ramp turned into a four-way intersection. You could turn left or right, or if you went straight, you could get right back on the highway. I pulled up to the end of the ramp, looked to the right, and there was the gas station. I started heading in that direction, but then I saw something that made me slam on my brakes. I looked at this gas station, and I suddenly saw 6 people, dressed in white shirts and white pants, dancing around the parking lot. It creeped me out. I didn't think there was anything supernatural about it at the time, but it was really odd that a group of people were dancing in an empty gas station parking lot around midnight. I didn't hear any music, but all 6 of them were moving like they were in a big mosh pit. Then one of them noticed me. He had been dancing very fluidly right at the front of the gas station, but all of a sudden he stopped, looked right at me for a few seconds, and started walking toward my car really quickly. As he took the first few steps toward us, he seemed to just snap. I don't really know how else to explain it, but it looked like the man's spine was completely bent at a 90-degree angle as he lurched into a weird power walk and continued walking right at my car, staying all hunched over like that. I floated it, went straight through the intersection, and got right back on the highway. As I pulled away, my girlfriend and I simultaneously said something like, "Did you ducking see that?" Her version of the story was identical to mine. The only difference is that she only saw 5 gas station dancers, whereas I saw 6 of them. We got gas at the next well-lit rest stop, an actual truck stop, not just some gas station off the side of the road. She's my wife now, and we have an unofficial wedding vow that we'll never stop in South Carolina for gas at night again. I was driving at about 1 to 2 a.m., coming home from a board game night at a friend's place that had run really late. They lived in a rural area, so it was a long and lonely drive home. I was alone in my car. There were 3 odd things that happened in quick succession. The first is that I drove into a very heavy bank of fog. The fog wasn't even that uncommon in the area, but only in the mornings and never after midnight. This area wasn't close to the ocean or something, and there was no wind, so it couldn't have been blown from somewhere else. Weird, but not unexplainable or scary. I reduced my speed so the car was only doing 40 or so and continued on. Eventually, I drove out of it. The second was that I came upon a huge tree that was on fire. Completely engulfed, she had to be at least 3 stories tall. It was a fair way from the road, and there was nobody I could see around it. Sometimes people burn out old trees, but why would they do it at 2 a.m.? There had been no storm, so it couldn't have been a lightning strike. The weirdest thing about it was that it felt strange looking at it. It was like some kind of portent or omen. I'm not a religious or superstitious person, but looking at this tree, I can't even explain the feeling. Like something important was happening or coming. But then I drove. Then I came upon a section of the road that was undergoing maintenance. It's not unusual to see crews working on roads all hours of the night. But in this case, there was no crew. I slowed down and stopped because there was a sign up saying to wait for directions. There were half a dozen trucks with lights flashing. Windows down. One of those small bobcat things with a scoop on the front, like a miniature bulldozer. Even a radio was playing somewhere, even though I couldn't see it. The scene burned into my brain 5 years later. The song American Pie was playing on the radio. And suddenly, I was afraid. More afraid than I had ever been before or since. I have been bitten by a deadly snake miles from help, had a gun pointed at me by a schizophrenic, and seen my sister nearly fall off a cliff. But never in my life have I been as afraid as I was in that moment. It was like I was actually having trouble catching my breath. It was flat ground in every direction. Even if these dozens of men had decided to hide as some sort of prank, there was nowhere for them to go. Then suddenly the song kind of skipped on the lyrics, "The jester stole his thorny crown." Except it wasn't like the same section of the song was just playing again. It was more like time was skipping. I don't even know how to explain this. I suddenly realized that something terrible was about to happen to me. It was probably the same thing that had happened to the road crew. So I punched the gas. Foot straight to the floor. For 2 long seconds, nothing happened. The car didn't even move despite being in drive with the engine running. Then suddenly the acceleration started, and I was pushed back in my seat, almost sideswiping some of the trucks. I drove at an unsafe speed for about another 15 minutes, and the feeling of danger was gone. Then I pulled over and cried my eyes out. My family was on vacation in a town 5 hours away from my hometown, Kansas. We were staying with my uncle and his family. We went up there because my father is a gym rat and he was supporting his friend in a bodybuilding competition. My dad drove up to his friend's hotel alone without us because they were going out to drink and go to clubs, probably. We were also super tired and already getting ready for bed. I was half asleep when my father left, but it was just me, my brother, and my mom. Anyway, flash forward like an hour or two, my dad had a little too much to drink and was drunk and unable to drive. My mom and uncle drove the 20-ish minutes across town to pick him up. They get to the bar, and they get my dad in the car. My mom was kind of mad at this point. It was around 12 a.m., and that's late for my mom. They get back on the road, heading to my uncle's house. My uncle was driving when, out of nowhere, a large deer ran next to the car. My mom also said his head was facing backwards. This is Kansas, and we have a lot of deer here because there's a lot of wood around here, but this was a highway in a large city. Not to mention that the deer was not in front of the car like a normal deer would, but as though the deer were racing the car. My mom says the deer was staring into her window, and she said the deer looked like the devil was inside it. She said he looked like he was angry, frustrated, and just had fear and complete hatred in his eyes. Also, the deer was galloping like a house. My mom says it just seemed super off. She was freaking out, and my uncle I saw a monster at the park. At first, I didn't believe her, but after a bit of questioning, she was serious. So we immediately got in the car, she put the food in the oven first so it wouldn't get cold, and drove over there. And there was nothing, of course. I was actually hoping there'd be a Halloween decoration or something, but nope. We circled the park, and then I had her park across the street so I could go look at the spot she saw it in. Nothing. I don't even know what I was thinking I'd find, but I still wanted to look around. Again, nothing. It was grass, so it wasn't like there'd be footprints anyway. And yeah, that's pretty much it, but I'll describe what she described to me. She said she was driving, and she saw someone kind of hiding behind a tree, but poorly. Obviously sticking out from that angle. But looking at it, she decided it wasn't actually a person, just kind of person-shaped. She described it as white, that's what drew her attention. She said it wasn't a color she'd expect to see. And she said it had glowing red eyes. I asked her if she meant reflective like a cat's or actually glowing. She said glowing. She described its fingers as pointy. She said it looked like it was watching the cars pass by on the street. She said it was kind of hunched over, so she couldn't be sure how tall it was, but she guessed around her height, 5 feet even, while in that position, probably taller fully upright. She was driving past, so she said she only saw it for about 4 to 5 seconds. Based on what I saw, there were 2 trees, maybe 4 feet apart, and they were maybe 30 feet from the road. I'm not great at math or measurements, so those numbers could be off. And I don't know if this is relevant or not, but we're in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. One night, me and my friend Sam decided to go smoke somewhere. I get into his beat-up Ford, and we set off. I lived in Vermont, where there were plenty of turn-offs and hidden smoke spots you just had to look for to find. So this night, Sam and I were bored, so we decided to go find a new smoke spot. It was one of those nights you could already tell we were going to be going out until at least 3 a.m. Luckily, I had told my parents that I was staying at his house that night, and his mom wasn't really around much and didn't care what time we got back. We left his house around 10:30, went to the local dealer, picked up some bud, and started driving down the usual back roads that we've lived on our whole lives. We start taking random turns just to go on some roads we haven't been on yet, and after a while, we still weren't making any progress. We were still in high school, so any sign of life or the possibility of a spot having a cop freaked us out and narrowed down our options quite a bit. Eventually, we found ourselves quite literally in the middle of nowhere, just driving down winding back roads. I see what looks like a spot with some potential, a turnoff with no sign or marking of any kind. We turn up the road in his beat-up white Ford and head up what appears to be an access road to some power lines. After a while of driving up this access road, which was just 2 tire tracks separated by some grass, we get to the top, and there's a small clearing and a makeshift parking lot where some service vehicles are able to have access to the power lines. We set up in the front seat with the car on and headlights still on, pointed at the forest, while we hit a few bowls from the tube. After a little time, there was a lull in the conversation, and we were both just kind of baked as hell looking at the forest in front of us, where the headlights had lit up. Suddenly, Sam sits up from his seat and asks me, "Is that a deer?" I sit up in the front seat and look out the window at what he is pointing at. From where I was sitting, it looked like a deer resting in the gravel, but it was sitting almost unnaturally. Sam threw the car into gear and pulled up next to it. We both got out, turned the car off, and pulled out our phone flashlights. We walk over next to it. We realize it is a deer, but not all of it. It was the head and the skin, but there was no meat on it or any blood, just the head attached to the skin. We both kind of just started saying to each other things like "what the duck" as we looked at it for a bit. Why would a hunter fully clean a dog and just leave the head and the skin? I said it a little off-puttingly. "I don't know, man," he says as he picks up a stick. He flips it over, and some strange symbol is carved into the other side of it. It looked almost like a plus sign, except all of the lines were curved, and it was embellished with some strange accent marks. We didn't think to take a picture of it, but in hindsight, we probably should have. Almost right after this, we hear noises coming from down along the power lines. For those of you who don't know, when there are big power lines running through the forest, they clear all of the forest under them, which leaves a narrow strip of clearing stretching the length of the power lines. The access road was on a ridgeline of sorts, and the power line ran perpendicular to the ridge, so we could see all the way down the hill into the valley and then up the other side through the narrow strip of clearing where there weren't any trees. Right after we hear the noises, we turn our flashlights off since both of us assumed that it was some service workers about to bust us, since who the hell else would be up here? We both stopped and listened to the sounds for a second. They were pretty distant, so we moved to the edge of the gravel lot, where we could hear them better. We hear the noises getting louder. It sounded like a bunch of people breaking sticks, and all of a sudden we see 20 to 25 people burst out of the tree line about 100 yards down from us, full on sprinting from tree line to tree line across the clearing. The starlight was bright enough to make out that the men were wearing all black Amish-looking clothing but without hats, and the women were wearing all white dresses, holding them above their knees and sprinting across the clearing. We had no idea why they were running, but almost instantaneously, me and Sam had the same idea. We both made a beeline for his car, and Sam peeled out of the gravel parking spot and headed back down the access road. The entire time in the passenger seat, I'm just saying, "What the duck, what the duck?" We both just started laughing at the insanity of what we just saw.
At this point, we must be doing 60 down this barely marked road when, out of nowhere in a split second, I see two shining dots in front of us, then huge yellow eyes, and then this massive silhouette that fills the whole windshield, and then bang.
We both audibly screamed, and my balls went so far up into my body. Sam slammed on the brakes and screamed, "Was that a fucking OWL?" I just remember screaming, "We are not fucking stopping. Go go go." We make it back onto the main road and then back to his house at around 2:30 a.m., smoke some more, and just talk about what the duck we just saw. To this day, we still talk about it, and neither of us knows what we saw. Were those people running towards something or away from something? No idea. Although it doesn't really make much sense, we both feel like the owl was related to what we saw, we just don't know how. This took place some years ago in between some small Texas towns. During my high school years, I dated a chick who lived about 30 miles away from my hometown. I'll refer to her as Elizabeth. I never disliked the drive. 30 minutes tops, enjoyable views, and a very slow car flow, which made it easy to speed through. One summer night, Elizabeth's parents were out of town, so she invited me to stay the night with her. Being a young high school kid, I didn't think about it twice, got in my car, and made the drive over there around 7 p.m. We hung out for a few hours, and suddenly we saw the headlights pulling into the driveway. My plans were ruined, and I would obviously not be spending the night with her. Elizabeth and I spent a few more hours together, and I decided to head back home around 2 a.m. As soon as I stepped out of her home, everything seemed calmer and more quiet than usual. Maybe her neighbors went to sleep early, I thought. I got in my car, made it to the highway, and drove out of town without seeing any cars along the way. I thought it was a little strange but didn't think much of it, considering how late it was and the small size of the town. About 5 to 10 miles out of town, I approached a bridge. My lights dimmed for a second, something I never noticed my car doing before. At the end of the bridge stood a figure darker than the tar of the highway and its surroundings. As I approached it, I realized the obscure shape resembled a canine, though its proportions were way bigger than any member of the canid family. I was a werewolf, I said to myself, trying to ease the moment with a silly remark. In reality, I was more afraid than ever of what I saw. The grotesque figure commenced to stand up on its back legs and looked up at the car with intense, hateful, and threatening red eyes. I know for a fact that these red eyes weren't caused by the glare of my beam lights. There was something evil about them, something that instantly terrified me. I kept on driving and honked a few times, hoping the thing would move out of the lane, like a threatened animal would do. It stood there, indefinitely rising from the ground, devouring all the darkness around it with its pitch blackness, and staring with those bright red eyes. It never moved. I was extremely close to the thing to slow down the car, so I swerved to the left into the lane, hoping, praying, I would not hit it head on. Regardless of my efforts, I felt the car violently shake as I hit the thing with the right side of the car. I stupidly slammed on the brakes and brought the car to a stop about 50 feet from the place of the impact. I stepped out of the car, hoping the damage from the impact wouldn't be too horrible and thinking of how much trouble I would be in with my parents the next morning. To my surprise, the car was completely damage-free. The place where I hit the creature was pristine, even cleaner than usual. I walked around the car, using the back red lights to look for any traces of the animal I had hit. Nothing. I thought I had gone crazy for a second, but after I realized that there was never anything there, I sensed the fetid smell of rotten eggs, and the temperature abruptly dropped. The sulfur stench was so intense that it made me cough. I ran back to the car, got in, and started the engine. It wouldn't start. The car had never given me trouble before, and I grew more afraid than ever before. I tried again, but nothing. The smell of sulfur got worse in the car, and it changed to a fecal smell, so unbearable that I was frantically coughing and gagging. Everything also seemed to be getting gradually darker. I don't know how to describe it, for I don't know what is darker than the night, but somehow it was horrible, pitch black. I was never much of a religious person, but during those few moments, I prayed with all my might for all of it to end and for the car to start. It finally did, and I drove away from that place like a maniac. I still didn't see any cars along the way until I arrived in my hometown. I finally made it home, still shaking from what had happened. I checked my phone before I walked into my house. It was about 5:20 a.m., and I had about 6 missed calls. I don't know how I lost 2 hours of my life. I swear that the events that took place on that highway didn't take more than 5 minutes, and the drive itself only took 30 minutes. I still have no recollection of that lost amount of time. I just get a headache every time I try to think about it. Even more than the horrible creature I came across, I am more afraid of what I don't remember and what could have happened to me during that time I can't remember. This occurred in the summer of 2012. I've only experienced missing time incidents a few times, but I will only share the story of the first time because that's the only one that had corroborating witnesses, so I could be absolutely certain of all the bizarre details. So this friend, whom we'll call Gio, would occasionally make what we jokingly called our game night Walmart runs. Basically, on some weekends when some of our schedules lined up right for us to be able to play video games late into the night like old times, we'd sometimes have to take a brief intermission to go get coffee, snacks, and energy drinks. These runs would typically occur around 2 or 3 a.m., and the reason we chose Walmart was because there was one that was only about 3/4 of a mile away. On this particular summer night in 2012, energy drinks were the only thing we were running low on, so we figured we'd take a break a little early at 12:47 a.m. to go get just the energy drinks and head back. If you're thinking it's oddly specific that I remember exactly 12:47 a.m., we'll get back to that later. Gio and I volunteer to be the ones to head out for the drinks, and we hop in my car and drive straight to the Walmart. There were no red lights along the way. We head straight inside and spend only about 2 or 3 minutes in the store. Wanting to get back to our gaming night, we rushed to grab only what we needed and headed to self-checkout. We drove straight home and arrived at our other friends, seeming much more tired and exhausted than when we left, and they asked what took so long. We thought they were joking and gave a smart-ass response about how long a drive it was. They seemed confused and demanded a more serious answer. That's when we got confused and asked what they were talking about. They showed us the clock, and we couldn't believe it was 4:30 a.m. We also checked the time on our phones to confirm this. Yep, 4:30 a.m. At this point, we started telling them everything, how we rushed straight there, went through the store quickly, and came straight back. They obviously weren't buying it. At this point, we started double-checking to make sure we had our timeline right. They'd sent us a text with a list of each of their preferred energy drinks, so we double-checked the time on that since they sent it seconds after we'd walked out the door. Yep, 12:47 a.m. Gio and I have discussed this incident a few times, trying to make sense of what happened. Ultimately, we've never been able to come up with any answers that make sense. As far as the friends we were hanging with that night, I'm unsure if they believed us or not that we really did go straight there and come straight back. It still makes me a little uneasy trying to untangle the confusion of what could have possibly happened that night. Last weekend, I was invited over to my friend's apartment to hang out. He lives about 10 or so minutes away, and I've been there countless times. Nothing about this place is new. No one is building anything. There's only 2 main roads you can take to get there, and he's surrounded by other houses, a Walgreens, a gas station, and a Rite Aid. He's not in the middle of nowhere. I stay for a few hours and decide to leave around 12:30 a.m. We didn't drink, we didn't do any drugs, we literally just sat on his couch and watched a movie while eating some pizza. Like I said, there's 2 roads to get to and from his house, and I decided to take the less busy, more residential one, which I usually do when I leave. Again, I've been on this road hundreds of times. So, I start driving, put the radio on, and await my turn, which is on the left. When it should be coming up, I start to look for it, but there's no turn. I drive for a bit more, maybe 5 minutes or so, and I think to myself that I probably just passed it because I've been driving for way too long at this point. Again, I think to myself, I'll just drive until I find a parking space where I can pull in and turn around. Except now that I'm actually really paying attention to where I'm going, I have no clue where I am. What should be houses around me are now woods. Complete, extremely dark, thick woods. The road is so narrow that there's no second lane, and it's so black that it's almost blue. I have to turn on my high beams, which is rare in my city, as we have street lights. I'm extremely confused because we don't have wood anywhere around there. Like I said, where he lives, there's a Walgreens, a dentist's office, gas stations, a laundromat, Burger King, Dunkin' Donuts, Walmart, etc. It's a place people frequent, a place where there's houses and apartments all over. Not woods. Anyway, I decide that I'll just drive for a few more minutes to see if I can get my bearings. I drive for about 3 to 5 more minutes, as there was only one song that played on the radio during that time, and there's just absolutely nothing but a straight 1-lane road, woods, and complete darkness. No houses, no cars, no street lights, no signs. I honestly started to get a little freaked out, and I figured that I should just turn around. To do so, I had to do a K-point turn, and with my high beams shining into the woods, there were just rows and rows of trees. You literally couldn't see anything. I'm just completely confused by this point, and I turned back around. I drove for about 3 to 5 more minutes, as there was a commercial break on the radio, and finally, I came back onto a street. A street I recognize because on the left is my friend's apartment. I'm back on the main road I turned onto when I left his place. Only now, it's 1:30 a.m., and I have a quarter of a tank of gas left, when I never let my tank get below half. Somehow, in those 10 to 20 minutes I was driving, an hour had passed, and I used up about half my tank of gas. Really confused now. I drive down the street, and my turn is on the left, right where it should be, meaning that I never passed it in the first place, as I didn't circle around. Even though I never turned off anywhere, the road is straight, and that's the only turn you can make. I somehow drove completely straight, turned, drove straight back again, and ended up right outside my friend's apartment. I have no clue if that's a glitch or if I somehow entered an alternate dimension. I don't know what happened. I told my brother the next day how I was surrounded by woods, how I never made a turn, and how there was just nothing, and he was puzzled too. He asked me, "Where were you?" Unfortunately, I don't think I'll ever be able to answer him. At this point, I'd even chalk it up to me being tired, as it was late, but I work nights and frequently stay up until 3 a.m. I live in Central Texas. It started with a friend of mine, Luke, needing a ride back to town from Houston. He's like family, so I went and brought him back. He stays kind of near the Dripping Springs area. Before he was in Houston, he and I had always heard some strange sounds at night on his property, but we always shrugged it off. He's got livestock, so we often protect them from coyotes and other things. Plus, we normally shoot guns out there and don't really worry about what's lurking out there. The night I brought him back, we pulled into his long driveway to head to the house, and along the driveway, he has this fire pit about 40 feet away from said road. I know these creatures are tall, but hear me out. Down by the pit, from the car, we both noticed 2 blue-bordered, massive yellow eyes in my headlight beam staring straight at us. I said, "Luke, what the F do you see that?" As I reached for my flashlight and one of my firearms, I ended up grabbing my .22 with hollow points, and I jumped out of my car window to run straight to the gleaming eyes. They seemed to blink once and then vanish into the dark. I ran to where I saw it standing and looked all around, the whole FBI flashlight/handgun stance. Scanning. I hear footsteps approaching from behind. It was startling at first, but these steps were from Luke coming up behind me and yelling, "Watch out." I turn around to him a few feet away. He stopped. He looked confused and looked around, then said, "It was just behind you, and it was waist high." I think to myself, what's waist high in his night vision? Mountain lions. So that's what I thought for a moment. Still standing in that spot, he says, "We need more gear," so we went to my car. We loaded and geared up. I killed the engine. Then, back into the trees. We approached the tree line, aiming the lights into the trees, about waist high. Then I beam my light upwards and see those same eyes dart in a straight line to our left, further into the trees, away from my car, and away from his house. Now we're spooked. How is it 9 to 10 feet up in the air or the trees without making a single noise? No wing flaps, no twigs, no footsteps. Just dead silence. It's about 2:30 a.m. now, and we had been following and going in the direction we saw the eyes trailing, staying very quiet. Suddenly, y'all, I promise and swear on my life to this day, out of the thicket, about 8 feet in front of me, I see the eyes open within the darkness of the woods. Massive. Glowing, and a few inches apart, which made me assume that this creature has size on its side. It stared at me, and I stared back. I'm facing this unknown creature at this moment, and I shakily ask, Luke, are you seeing this? I'm not moving my flashlight or breaking eye contact. I want to know where this thing is and if it moves. I don't, dude. What do you see? Luke, are you sure you don't see this? I don't know what it is. I assumed the only reason he did not see these eyes was because of my flashlight and my angle with the beam. He was not standing directly in front of the creature, as he was about 6 feet to my right at the moment, so I understand why he couldn't see what I saw due to angle and perspective. After that little back and forth, I see it approaching me. It got closer. Hell no. I raised my handgun. I said, I'm firing, and then fired at this unknown being directly between the eyes. The round I just fired stirred up a lot of shit. We heard a very short but low-pitched growl or grunt, followed by what sounded like something very heavy, easily heavier than myself, knocking into a couple of the trees around it. Above, the birds in that tree dispersed. We heard no footsteps, no retreating, and stayed there a few moments longer. Listening. Scanning. We stayed out there waiting to hear or see anything else for about an hour after that, but the night was quiet and calm afterwards. We go inside, call it a weird day, and go to bed. Next morning, we went to where we spotted and fired. Then we found a bunch of triangle-shaped footprints that led to the fence. We look up. There's a break in the top fencing wires. On the other side of the break, a few limbs and branches had been freshly broken off as they lay on the ground. Some remained dangling and facing the forest floor, like, where would you land if you were to jump from the wire break at the top? This is all I have on this story, other than the fact that my friend and I still occasionally see those eyes at night, in our dreams, and in our windows. Back in 2011, I was tasked with hauling a load from the distributor in Detroit, Michigan, to Seattle, Washington, and due to overnight construction on the interstate, I needed to take a road called Montana Highway 200. That road is the epitome of what I described earlier, hours of driving without seeing another living soul. Due to my schedule, I found myself traversing this stretch of road around 11 p.m. I was wide awake, though, so I decided to push on. I was about 130 miles east of the city of Great Falls, Montana, and I was watching one show or another, just kind of spacing out as I drove through the dark. All the electronics on the rig suddenly flickered. The laptop screen went black for a few quick moments, as did the headlights and the lights on the sides of the truck. After a few seconds, all was fine, though I was a bit perturbed because the lights on the truck were the only lights around me. Without them, I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. I continued driving for another few miles, and everything flickered a few more times. I came up over a hill, and the headlights dimmed severely, to the point where I could only see a few feet past the front of the truck. As I reached the bottom of the hill, the lights suddenly surged. The brights were brighter than they'd ever been, the interior lights of the truck were on at 110% power, and the orange lights on the side of the truck glowed brightly into the darkness that surrounded me. And with that, the truck shut down. I came rolling to a stop at the bottom of the hill and spent some time trying to fix the issue, ultimately finding myself unable to get the truck started back up. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, and of course, I had no signal. With nothing in front of or behind me for 50 miles and the fact that I hadn't seen another vehicle on this road since I got on it, I decided the only thing I could really do was try to get a signal on my phone to call AAA. I grabbed a flashlight, got out of the truck, and began doing the ever-popular hold your phone up in the air move while I walked aimlessly in the dark. I think it was because I was so focused on the truck and my phone that I didn't realize how terrifying it was out there. The stars weren't very bright, and the moon was resting comfortably behind trees in the distance. Being at the bottom of a hill didn't help. I stayed close to the truck but wandered around a bit, looking for any semblance of a signal. When I still couldn't get any, I shined my flashlight around a bit and saw a hill on the opposite side of the road. Just as I was going to go to the hill, I saw a light in the distance, the unmistakable glow of headlights. I breathed a sigh of relief, then looked down at my phone, then back up, and the lights were substantially closer than they just had been, much too close for a car to be driving. Then I blinked, and once again they were gone, but at that same moment, it was like the sounds of the world stopped. Cicadas in the distance ceased, crickets went silent, and the sound of blowing wind evaporated, and with that, it was completely, deafeningly, ear-shatteringly silent. It was so quiet that it was disorienting. I leaned against the truck while I got my bearings, and then once again tried to find the lights that had been driving toward me, but I couldn't see them. I shined my flashlight around me, out into the distance, trying to find the hill I had wanted to climb to try to get a signal on my phone, but I was taken aback when something else caught my eye. A door. Off the side of the road, about 10 to 15 yards out, there was a door. It was a door like any one you'd find in a house. Intrigued, I walked over to it with a cautious reserve. It was in a frame and had a doorknob and everything. As I got closer, I felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety come over me. I wasn't scared, necessarily, but rather nervous. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't hear anything. A car may or may not have been heading in my direction, and there was a door standing in what was quite literally the middle of nowhere. It was just an overload of things I didn't understand. I reached the door and walked around it, and it was just that, a door standing free in the middle of a huge open field. Now that I was closer, I could see that there was a design in the door, flowers, to be precise, painted in very light pastel colors, so light that even if it was the middle of the day, I wouldn't have been able to see them from where I'd first noticed the door. As I was inspecting it, my sense of hearing returned, and I was hit with a flood of noise. Like the lights that were amplified a short time prior, the sounds blared like my head was inside a speaker. The sounds of crickets and cicadas nearly brought me to my knees before they returned to normal levels. I had barely had a chance to collect myself when I saw movement near the front of the truck.
I shined my light towards it, and for a split second, I saw a glimpse of what looked like a person moving from my line of vision to behind the truck.
I yelled out to whoever it was with a generic "hey," and abandoned my interest in the door. I lightly jogged over to the truck, and with the same cautious reserve, I turned the corner to see who was by the truck. The same thing happened, though, and as I turned the corner, so did whoever it was that was there, only at the other end of the truck, and I saw the same glimpse of a possible person now moving behind the trailer. Instead of chasing them the way they were going, I moved in the opposite direction and tried to meet them around the other side of the truck, but when I did, I saw no one. I couldn't hear any footsteps or anything. It was like I'd imagined someone there, only I knew I hadn't. I decided to look under the truck to see if I could see the feet of whoever it was. I crouched down, got as low as I needed to see underneath the trailer, and shined my flashlight. Of course, I saw no one. But at that moment, I felt eyes on me. The feeling was unmistakable. I'm sure you know the one I'm talking about. I slowly stood back up and shuddered when I was finally upright. I then felt a warm breath on my neck and quickly spun around, only to find myself face to face with someone. I still don't know what I was looking at. Their face was a blur, like it was vibrating almost, but not. I know that's a terrible description, but it's the only way I can think of to put it. If you've ever seen the show The Flash, think of Reverse Flash, but only their face. The only feature I could make out was actually a lack of a feature, where eyes would have been, though I wouldn't have been able to really see them properly. There was just solid black, like the sockets were hollow. They were wearing a suit, but it was like an amalgam of other suits. A patchwork array of different fabrics and monochromatic colors were all sewn together, though it was all done very precisely, like you could actually go into a store and buy it. It wasn't sloppy in the least. Finally, on their head was a top hat, though a subtle one. It was a dark gray, almost gunmetal, and somehow it, as well as the rest of their body, was still, only their face seemed to be out of focus. I was frozen in fear, once again consumed by the anxiety caused by the unknown and unfamiliar. I simply stood there, face to face with this person, for what seemed like an eternity, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 2, maybe 3 seconds. I then felt another warm breath on the back of my neck, which made me instinctively shudder and spin around, but there was no one behind me. Upon seeing this, I turned around once again to keep my eyes on whoever I had just been face to face with, only they were gone. I was alone once again. The feeling of being watched was gone. I was standing next to the truck by myself, the normal sounds of the night surrounding me, and the crippling feeling of anxiety had dissipated. The orange lights on the side of the truck then flickered back on, as did the headlights. I cautiously walked around to the driver's side of the truck and climbed in, finding that when I'd gotten out of the truck, I had left the keys in the ignition and turned to the point that the electrics in the vehicle would be on. I closed the door and attempted to start the truck, and I was relieved when there was a rumbling and then the roar of the engine. I didn't think twice before putting it into gear and continuing down Montana Highway 200. I was in the USAF stationed in Omaha in the late 1980s. At the time, I was hanging out with my roommate and another friend. My name is Tracy. My roommate's name was Tracy. The girl we hung out with was named Stacy. When we were together, everyone always thought we were lying and being the silly teenagers we were, but we always found it funny. One weekend, we decided to take a road trip to Kansas City, Missouri. We were speeding down the highway, laughing and singing at the top of our lungs. We were happy and having the time of our lives. Stacy was driving, and she had a bit of a lead foot. She must have been going too fast because before for some time down this dirt road and then pulled into an area that had a big, beat-up old barn. As he stopped and we stopped behind him, a group of men with shotguns exited the barn. It wasn't until that point that we realized we were in mortal danger, and panic set in. The officer walked back to our car and told Stacy to get out and follow him to his car. As she got out, she looked at me and Tracy, and there was sheer terror on her face. She followed him to his car, and he motioned for her to get in on the passenger side. She did. Tracy and I were crying, and as the armed men stood on the side of the car looking at us, we began quietly praying for God to protect the three of us. We prayed that Stacy wasn't being hurt and that somehow they would let us leave. After some minutes, Stacy bolted out of the officer's car, ran back to the car, and jumped in the driver's seat. She was crying hysterically. So, of course, Tracy and I began crying harder. The officer got out of his car and walked back to our car, this time to Tracy's window, as she was in the front passenger seat. He asked, "Is it true all of you are in the Air Force?" To which Tracy replied, "Yes, sir." The officer calmly said, "Get out of here and go back to where you came from. I better not see you again." As soon as he finished, Stacy turned on the car, whipped it around, and sped back down the dirt road. She somehow navigated back to the highway. As she drove back toward the base, the silence was only broken by an occasional sob from one of us. Stacy drove for a while, and as soon as we crossed back over into Nebraska, she pulled over on the side of the highway. Then she began to sob heavily. Tracy and I hugged her and asked if she was hurt in any way. She shook her head. She wasn't hurt. After she calmed down enough, she told us what happened in the police car. After she got in the car, she offered the officer her identification and told him she was sorry for speeding. He took her information and then asked her, "What are you doing with those two N-words?" Stacy was white. She explained that we were on a road trip. He then told her that if she would do certain favors for him, he might let us go with a warning. At that point, Stacy had a complete meltdown. I guess while he was waiting for her to calm down, he finally looked at her identification and saw that she had also given him her military ID. He asked her if we were all in the military, and between sobs, she said we were. He asked where we were stationed, and she told him off at AFB. He then told her to go back to her car. As we sat there after Stacy told us what occurred, I think it hit all three of us at the same time that the only thing that saved us was that we were in the military and stationed at a nearby base. We hugged each other and cried until we could not cry anymore. We didn't report what had happened. Again, we were teenagers and didn't think we would be believed by a law enforcement officer. We never talked about it after that day. That incident has haunted me for years. All of the what ifs. But as I have gotten older, what haunts me more is the thought that others may not have been as lucky as we were. If you are ever traveling in or around a forested area and see lights outside of your vehicle or in the distance, I'd suggest you find the fastest route out of there, for you don't want to know what these lights are. If it makes you feel better, you aren't alone in these sightings. Thousands have reported seeing a bright flash or flickering light somewhere deep in the woods. It's all over the United States, specifically in the Pacific Northwest or the Appalachian Mountains. For the rest of the world, I do not know. I have seen the lights only once before, and I almost didn't live to tell the tale. My encounter was in Tennessee, I believe, in the summer of 1997. I was traversing a barren highway at the dead of night, with no other cars in sight. I was on the highway at that time because I was going to visit family down south. I was beginning to regret not stopping for the night, for my eyes were getting heavy, and I was growing ever so tired as the time passed. It got so bad that I pulled off onto a little gravel shoulder on the side of the highway. Before I dozed off, I noted the time on the dashboard of my car. It read 11:58 p.m. I promptly fell asleep. I awoke to something, though I couldn't figure it out then. I looked again at the time on the dashboard. 4:03 in the morning. I had been asleep for about 4 hours. I focused my dreary gaze on the highway in front of me, and then I saw it. A flash. Just up on the horizon, in the woods. I thought I was dreaming at first. Then, it happened again. This time, we are a little closer to the road. I didn't know what to think, other than that whatever that was, it was supernatural. Another flash happened, this time at the foot of the tree line, about 150 or so yards away from my idle car. It was getting closer. I began to hear cracking in the trees, as if a not-present wind was swaying them. I was scared. I was scared to the point where I wanted to hide in my car and pray to the Lord that whatever it was would leave me be. Another flash, this time engulfing the road ahead of me, and with that, I lost it. I jammed my keys into the ignition, and my car roared to life. I put the gear in reverse and floored it. I whipped around in my car and put the gear back into drive. I looked in the rear-view mirror, just as the next flash occurred. I swear, there was some ungodly thing running toward my car, illuminated by the paranormal light. I screamed and gunned it down the highway. The engine under the hood squealed as I stomped the gas pedal into the floor. That thing was gaining on my car at speeds too great to be possible for any humanoid. I was still a good 300 feet ahead of it, and I was by now topping 90 miles an hour. In hindsight, the thing was probably running at around 105 miles per hour. I focused on the rear-view mirror, and I got a better look at the beast. It was tall, maybe around 14 feet tall. Its skin was a mesh of bone, rotting flesh, and who knows what else. Its hands, or rather claws, had daggers hanging off its fingers, sharp enough to cut metal in half, no problem. Its face was the most terrifying aspect of it. Its jaw was unhinged, almost like a snake. Its teeth were bent and crooked, stained with mud and bits of various materials. And its eyes. They were massive. They glowed a crimson red and seemed to penetrate your very soul. I about threw up at the sight of the beast. At just how impossible this thing was. I was beginning to realize I would die in these hills. I glanced at the speedometer, seeing the needle hovering over the 110 miles per hour mark. Another flash, and I saw the thing too close for comfort behind me. I was about 50 feet ahead of it, but that gap was closing fast. I flew over a hill, and I saw a light in the distance. I suddenly knew where I was. I was nearing the end of the woods and approaching the nearby town next to it. I thanked God that I had a shot at survival and began blaring my horn, trying to alert anyone who would be up at this hour. I heard a roar, and my car lurched forward. The thing was right behind my car, and I was trying to topple it. My car was reaching 120 millipascals, which was the most it could offer. The lights were growing bigger in the distance, and I guessed it was about 100 yards more before I would be out of those woods. The creature again lifted the rear end of my car, and I was lifted into the air. It had caught me, and I was so close to freedom. I dove over the center console and opened the glove compartment. I pulled out the pistol that was inside and loaded a magazine into the gun. I bought it for safety reasons, and this was the perfect time to utilize it. I chambered a round and stuck my arm out of the window of my car. I realized I was face to face with the thing, and I aimed the gun at its eyes. I squeezed the trigger, and the thing roared in obvious pain. I shot it at least 5 times, and even after it dropped me onto the pavement below, I fired at it until the gun was empty of bullets. It darted back into the woods. I turned and sprinted the remainder of the way into town. The police had heated up the gunshots and found me wandering the streets, covered in the thing's blood. I was taken into the police department and told them my story. Nobody believed me. Until the next day. I led them back to the site of my car, or what was left of it. Nobody could explain the wreckage. They couldn't explain the blood trailing off into the woods. And they couldn't explain the claw marks and handprints that were too large for a human's on the back of my car. I believe the thing came from the flashes in the woods. And if you ever see one, turn around and floor it back out of the woods before you end up like me. I live in northern New Jersey, away from the smokestacks and shipping yards. What surrounds me are what seem to be endless stretches of wood and long, dark roads. I live 10 minutes from one of the most notorious scary roads in the country, which is Clinton Road. I have driven and walked on this road at night before and have never had any real encounters. One time a truck was stopped in the middle of the road and 2 guys out of nowhere appeared, got in the truck, and drove off, but I attribute that to stupidity and thinking they could take a leak without parking rather than linking it to something creepy. My girlfriend lives in this part of town, and I am almost always driving home at 2 in the morning, sometimes later, on the notorious Clinton Road. About 2 months ago, I was driving like normal, hadn't passed a car the entire time, and was venturing into the darkest, most secluded part of Clinton Road. As my lights start to illuminate my path, I notice that in the distance, there is a person walking in the exact middle of the road. As if he were using the double yellow line as his guide, he walked on in the darkness until I came upon him. To be honest, I really didn't see a problem with this. Some people are just not afraid of walking in the dark, and while I didn't do it alone, I myself walked a mile on this road in the pitch darkness with a friend of mine. What did strike me as odd was that the closer I got to him, I had slowed down considerably at this point, the more I knew he was not going to move. I knew he saw the headlights. They were lighting up the entire road. Yet he walked on dead center, not even acknowledging that I had pulled up beside him. He was dressed in a dark blue sweatshirt with no label attached to it and tan cargo shorts. He had a backpack on and his hood up. I could make out his face. He was in his early 20s and had fairly nice skin. He looked clean-shaven and didn't seem like he was in any danger or in need of a ride. Besides the fact that in no way did he once acknowledge that I was even there for the 15 seconds as I was next to him, asking if he was okay and that he probably shouldn't be walking in the middle of the road so late at night, the face he was making kind of creeped me out. His face was very tense, and he looked completely determined by something. The only way I can best describe it is as total focus, staring dead ahead. I said, "Okay, then," and continued driving in silence as I tried to comprehend what I saw. Hopefully the kid was okay and just had a weird night, but I still can't fully understand. I, 38, male, am from Ireland. I've lived with my dad in Dublin most of my life, but my grandma still lived in Kilkenny. She always said the only way she'd move house was in a coffin, and she ended up being right about that. I visited her often when I got my license. We were really close from pretty much the second I popped out of my mother. She always gave me loads of food and treats, like grannies do, and allowed me to watch TV and stay up longer. Dad was always a bit strict, so visiting her was basically like a mini vacation. This happened ages ago, maybe in 2010. It wasn't long after I got my license, and it was a Saturday, I think, as I had a day off work. A warm summer evening was a welcome break from all the rain the previous week. It wasn't really dark, just this dusky blue twilight, and even just driving on the back of the pretty new motorway felt magical, and I guess no small part of it was that driving was still this new and shiny thing and felt like pure freedom. Overall, in the moment, I was feeling good about life and had the radio on low volume. What happened a bit before the turn to the N10 to Kilkenny. The radio went into loud static. My car was an absolute pile of junk, but so far the radio had been the only part of it that hadn't broken once. I cussed like a sailor and took my eyes off the road for a second while I fiddled with it and even gave it a slap for good measure, but when I looked back up, I had to smash the brakes so hard that I'm pretty sure I gave myself whiplash because there was someone on the road. In front of me, walking slowly towards me in the middle of my side of the road, was a tall and lean but muscular woman, stark naked. She stopped as I did and stood there all tense, like she was about to bull rush the car and smash into it, her chest heaving with every breath so hard it seemed to shake her entire body. It took way too long before I noticed what was wrong with her, but just when I was about to honk at her, it hit me, and I nearly shot 7 shades of shit onto the ripped up car seat. She had no head. I remember how every single hair on my head, neck, and arms stood up, and I let out this ugly yelp and couldn't breathe like someone had kicked me in the chest. One of her hands was holding what I first thought were her bloody clothes. She clearly wasn't wearing them, but when my brain finally freaking rebooted, I saw they were too shiny. Her insides were hanging out of this massive slit in her stomach. You'd think you'd notice those things first, and it's weird how you don't. It just didn't compute. She was all black and blue too, some of it looked like badly done tattoos, and other bits were just dirt, bruises, or weird shadows, like she'd tumbled down a whole mountain. And how the hell did she still look tall without a head? Like, sure, I'm a bit of a teapot, but she was huge. I'm glad there weren't any other idiot drivers on the road then, because I must have been staring at this lady for minutes and minutes before something even more messed up happened. She ran towards me while I screamed like a baby, leapt up onto the nose, and ran up the windshield and onto the roof, all while holding her freaking guts in the crook of her arm like a soggy grocery bag. Except for a faint orange glow that kind of looked like she was backlit by something, there was nothing see-through or ethereal about her. Her steps made a heavy thump, thump, thump as she ran over the metal. I don't remember driving after that, but I must have since I got to my grandma's and snapped out of it. I started hyperventilating like mad on the spot because that's maybe the scariest thing, that I don't know if I fell asleep while driving or was dreaming with my eyes open. I cried in the car for a bit, I think, from the pure shock wearing off before going in. I don't know if it was a ghost from a traffic accident who wanted a ride home or what. When I told my grandmother, half jokingly, that I might have fallen asleep and saw a headless woman, she basically told me to not be a daft little turd and shoved a ham sandwich in my mouth. Then we sat down, watching TV like always. When I went out for a smoke at like 11 in the evening, I took a look at the car. It was pretty dark, but from what I could see, there weren't any dents, footprints, handprints, or anything else on the car. Surely the woman in such a miserable condition would have left something like smudges of blood or mud, at least, right? But she wasn't real anyway, I guess. People aren't usually in the habit of running around headless like that. I kept telling this story to my friends and coworkers and asking people about ghost sightings and everything until they told me I was going a bit too far and mad with it. Sorry, there's no good dramatic ending. All I know for sure is that I saw a big, headless woman with her guts out, hopping onto my car like a cat. My gut tells me it wasn't a dream. Or if it was, it sure blended in seamlessly with reality. I still kind of hope someone has seen something similar. I live in a very rural place, in a small town that has maybe a few thousand residents, but we're all so spaced out and hidden in the hills that you'd never know that many people live here, unless there was a 4th of July carnival or some kind of festival. My town isn't anything fancy. We don't have the most up-to-date stores and all that, but, for the most part, we're all happy and thankful for what we do have. The neighborhoods were like mini-communities. We all cared and helped one another. Everyone was friends with everyone, and we all knew each other's business. It was the middle of spring. Lovely weather in the mornings and nights, but as the day went on, you could feel the heat steadily rise. As the heat rose, families came outside to bask in the bright sunlight, while young kids laughed and played. This spring day was just like any other day. I got up, got ready for school, and left to go listen to mundane lectures for the next 8 hours. I'll never forget that feeling I had while I sat and daydreamed, wishing time would go faster just for the school day. That little glimmer of hope would trickle up into my brain when the clock finally read 3 p.m. It's time to go home. Oh, thank God. I thought to myself as the 3 p.m. bell rattled my ears. I rush home, as always, even though I know the only thing that I'm rushing towards is a mountain of homework. It's like my mind plays tricks on me, making me think that simply being out of school and at home is a relaxing reward for getting through the day, although there wasn't any actual relaxing, it was just more stress in a comfortable environment. I hustle through the multiple pages, completing every problem with a bit of skepticism and questioning my intelligence. But nonetheless, I talk myself up and get through it. Before I knew it, the clock read 8 p.m. time to eat and shower, and then I can rest for the first time today. I complete these remaining 2 tasks and gleefully skip to my bedroom. I slip on whatever large t-shirt I can find and jump into my large pink bed, letting the comfort of my soft pillows and furry covers overtake me as I slowly sink into the mattress. I'm one of those people who wakes up very easily. I'm not kidding, a mouse could fart, and it'd wake me up. So when I felt my eyelids trying to shut, I took full advantage. I tuck myself in, get comfortable, and go straight to sleep. Now, these next events are questionable, to say the least. I still, to this day, have no idea why God showed me what he did. I've even questioned if it was God that showed me this or if this was the work of the devil. The very second my eyelids shut, I'm no longer asleep in my cozy bed. I'm in the passenger seat of a small black truck, an S10, a truck that I've never even seen in person, let alone been in before, and I'm hot. I'm so hot. I instantly feel gobs of sweat pour down my face and chest. My once comfortable t-shirt is already drenched in heavy sweat, clinging to my body. It's like my physical body has been here much longer than my mind is aware of. The heat instantly sends my mind into a frenzy. Intrusive thoughts race through every crevice of my brain as my breath becomes shallow, as if my lungs were incapable of inhaling the boiling air. I frantically look around the black interior of the truck, trying to find the door handle to get out, but there isn't one. That's when I notice that, not only am I in the passenger seat, but the truck is moving. I glance over to the driver's seat to see a large, black, blurry figure that looks like the outline of a person. It's like these black pixels that are constantly moving, yet making sure to keep the outline visible, and it is driving this truck. I couldn't focus on anything more than the entity itself at this point. The dark particles erratically swirled all through this outline of a person, imitating normal human movements as one would do when driving. I could see the black pixels wrap around the steering wheel, as the wheel would move in whatever direction the entity willed it to. Complete dread coats every limb of my body as I try to focus on these particles, but I just couldn't. No matter how hard I tried, this thing remained so blurry, all I could see was the scattered outline of a person that was a little bigger than me. As I stare at the outline with intense bewilderment, I'm met with sudden feelings of nostalgia and grief, but I no longer feel fear, at least not for the entity. Before I can even question why I'm experiencing these emotions, they were viciously ripped away in a matter of milliseconds. My mind is yet again forced to focus on the overwhelming heat that is continuing to seep through the black truck. I can feel the gallons of sweat that have combined with the fabric seat gushing as I move my burning body. The heat is so intense, I'm barely able to hold my head up to look out of the scorched windows. We're in the old hollow that I grew up in as a child. The same little red house my neighbor and I played at daily, the same tire swing my cousin and I spent many evenings on, the same blacktop road that was eaten away with more potholes than you can count. It was all there. Everything I'd grown to love and cherish. But it was all on fire. The trees were glowing bright yellow, so bright, it was like you could sense the vibration of the intense flames just by looking at them. The grass was swaying with vibrant colors of yellow and orange as the fire consumed every inch of this world. The sky was overtaken by huge, dark clouds of black smoke that never seemed to let up. The road was even engulfed in these extraordinary flames, like we were magically driving on molten lava, yet I could still feel every pothole the truck drove over. Tears fill my eyes, and just for a moment, I forget that my body feels like it's in the middle of being cremated. But then I hear the screams. Screams were coming from the fire. These high-pitched screams were cries of agony and despair. You don't ever forget screams like this. Screams that make your blood curdle and your stomach turn. Screams that are so prominent, it's like you can feel their pain. My body tightens uncontrollably, and I'm met with an immense feeling of sorrow. I can no longer talk or move, I'm frozen in place. I'm forced to witness the best memories of my childhood and the people I love burned to ash in this world made of fire. The black figure continues to drive us further into my old hollow, which is now immersed in blazing flames and cries of torment, as I'm melted to the seat, unable to move or scream. This continues for what seems like forever. How do I get out? Get me out. These were the only thoughts I could muster. The black figure suddenly turns to me, as if recognizing my presence for the first time, and I'm jolted awake. I wake up drenched in sweat, as if I had just come out of a sauna. Considering the AC was set to 68 degrees and I had my fan on, per usual, I knew the sweat had to be from the flames of my dream. I start hysterically crying and run straight to my mother's bedroom. Now, keep in mind that I'm a teenager. Running to my mother's bedroom because of a bad dream is something I haven't done since I was a very young child. I frantically wake her up and try to relive this nightmare I narrowly escaped, just long enough to explain why I was so utterly terrified. As I open my mouth, my words seem to melt together, as if I were babbling like a baby, not making any sense. Without full comprehension of why her daughter was crying uncontrollably, Mom instantly wrapped her loving arms around me and started praying in that same sweet tone she used when I got hurt as a small child. After a few minutes of consoling, I realize that I'm safe now, and that brings just enough comfort so I can force back my tears and random babbling. Thinking that the unnerving night was nearing its end was a soothing feeling that allowed me to drift back off to sleep in my mother's arms. However, that relief was short-lived. Fast forward to 2 days later. Again, it was a normal day for me. At least on this day, I have a hair appointment to look forward to. It feels nice to have a tiny bit of excitement for more than just going home after school. Besides, this is a positive distraction from the nightmare that tormented me just 2 nights ago. It was just a bad dream, you're okay now. I tell myself, ignoring the obvious denial I'm in. I get to the salon, which happens to be owned by my cousin, Laura, like I said, small town. I happily strut in the salon and sit down, smiling ear to ear, simply happy to have a minuscule change of scenery. Laura and I start off with the normal, nice formalities. How are you? How's your day been? Etc. Silence freshens the air for all of 3 seconds before she sighs and says, "Did you hear about Ben?" Ben is our cousin as well. I grew up with him and his sister when I was a child. Back then, our whole neighborhood was very well connected and close, we all cared for one another, and we acted like one big, happy family. I hadn't seen Ben in many years, though. We moved out of that neighborhood when I was in the 5th grade, and Ben and I lost touch. As soon as Laura said Ben, my mind was flooded with memories of my childhood. The days that seemed to go by in a flash, climbing hills, swinging on tire swings, wading through the creek, my body felt warm as nostalgia filled my every thought. I did everything I could to push back what I had seen just 2 nights ago, my childhood in those energetic flames. But that nostalgia was quickly interrupted when Laura handed me photos of what looked to be a black S10 truck. The truck looked like bent up chunks of metal scattered across the scuffed up pavement. As badly as the truck was torn apart, I already knew there was no way possible for anyone to survive that. It was nothing more than scraps, surrounded by broken glass and blood. But as I continue to stare at the photos with immense disbelief, I can't shake the feeling that I know this truck. I know that black interior, I know the entire inside of this vehicle, yet I know I never actually rode in a black S10. The nightmare. I thought as my eyes widened and my breath shortened. That is how I know this truck. This was the truck that the black figure trapped me in while we drove through hellfire. I had no idea that Ben had a black S10. Again, I hadn't talked to him in years. It turns out Ben had been out partying for his 21st birthday. He had also been drinking alcohol. I mean, who wouldn't drink on their 21st birthday? The mistake he made was driving home after he was drunk. He wrecked and passed away in the same hollow that the black entity drove me through. The same hollow where all of our childhood memories were made. The same hollow that was eaten by flames 2 nights ago. The very night I was forced to witness this nightmare was the same night Ben passed away. After years of racking my brain, the only plausible explanation I can come up with is that this was some sort of message, although I'm still not sure what that message was. I believe the outline of the person who was driving us was Ben. The last spot in my childhood hollow that I had seen before I was startled awake was the place where Ben had died. It's almost like I was in the truck with him when he was driving that night. I was vigorously flung back to reality once he wrecked and died. Maybe that's why he couldn't sense my presence until the very end. I just don't understand it, and I'm not sure I ever will. I still have so many questions. Questions that eat away at my soul, deepening the voids that the mysterious flames coercively tore open. Should I have focused harder on my nightmare? Why was I the one who experienced this? Why me? What should I have done differently? And the question that still fills my very soul with peril. Could I have saved his life?